berkembangnya teknologi informasi, diperlukan pengetahuan mengenai bagaimana cara mengelola teknologi informasi yang sesuai dengan kebutuhan dan proses bisnis dari suatu perusahaan. Sebagai salah satu institusi terbaik di Indonesia, ITS memberikan sumbangsih dengan mendirikan sebuah departemen yang bernama Sistem Informasi yang sejalan dengan kebutuhan tersebut. Departemen Sistem Informasi didirikan pada tanggal 14 Juni 2001 atas dukungan dari Presiden keempat Republik Indonesia, Bapak Abdurrahman Wahid. Pada pidato beliau di saat Disnatalis ITS yang ke-40 yang menyarankan ITS untuk membuat sebuah fakultas yang selaras dengan perkembangan teknologi informasi. Mahasiswa sistem informasi dibina agar pada saat lulus mereka mempunyai kemampuan sebagai individu yang mampu berkontribusi di bidang sistem informasi. Profil lulusan Departemen Sistem Informasi adalah perekayasa data dan informasi, analis sistem, manajer proyek IT, manajer informasi bisnis, analis bisnis, dan perintis bisnis IT. Saat ini, Departemen Sistem Informasi telah mendapatkan akreditasi A untuk program studi sarjana dan B untuk program studi pasca sarjana dari Badan Akreditasi Nasional Perguruan Tinggi atau BAN-PT. Selain itu, Departemen Sistem Informasi juga mendapatkan akreditasi internasional, yaitu Asian University Network Quality Assurance Standard. Sejak berdiri, Departemen Sistem Informasi sudah jauh berkembang dengan total mahasiswa mencapai 771 mahasiswa, memiliki 2 program studi sarjana dan pasca sarjana, memiliki 35 dosen dan 21 tenaga kependidikan. Selain itu, Departemen Sistem Informasi juga membuka kelas sarjana internasional atau International Undergraduate Program yang dalam proses belajarnya menggunakan bahasa Inggris sebagai bahasa pengantar. Departemen Sistem Informasi memiliki 5 laboratorium penelitian yang terdiri dari Infrastruktur dan Keamanan Teknologi Informasi, IKTI, Akuisisi Data dan Diseminasi Informasi, ADDI, Manajemen Sistem Informasi, MSI, Rekayasa Data dan Inteligensi Bisnis, RDIB, dan Sistem Enterprise, SE. Sebagai sarana pendukung, Departemen Sistem Informasi menyediakan fasilitas yang bisa digunakan untuk mahasiswa, meliputi ruang kelas yang nyaman, ruang sidang, ruang baca, ruang kesehatan, laboratorium pembelajaran, ruang diskusi pasca sarjana, dan fasilitas umum lainnya seperti musola, parkir, dan toilet. Kualitas mahasiswa sistem informasi dapat dibuktikan dengan perolehan berbagai prestasi, seperti juara pertama dalam kompetisi Future Ready ASEAN di Bangkok, Thailand pada tanggal 27-28 November 2019, Best Project Manager pada kompetisi Project Manager Competition pada tanggal 27 September 2019. Pada kompetisi gimnastik tahun 2019, Sistem Informasi menyumbangkan 2 juara, yaitu juara pertama kategori Cyber Security dan juara kedua kategori Data Mining. Hingga yang terbaru, mahasiswa Sistem Informasi menjadi pemenang dalam kompetisi COVID-19 INA Ideaton 2020 yang diselenggarakan oleh Kemenristek Indonesia. Sebagai departemen yang ingin lulusannya dapat bersaing di dunia global, Departemen Sistem Informasi memberikan kesempatan kepada mahasiswanya untuk mengikuti program pertukaran pelajar atau Student Exchange Program ke berbagai institusi pendidikan di berbagai negara, seperti Cardiff Metropolitan University, United Kingdom. Selain itu, ada juga short program yang bekerja sama dengan Kumamoto University, Japan, Inha University South Korea, Shibaura Institute of Technology Japan, dan program Joint Degree atau Double Degree khusus untuk mahasiswa pasca sarjana yang bekerja sama dengan National Cheng Kung University Taiwan, National Tsinghua University Taiwan. Di samping itu, Departemen Sistem Informasi juga sering mengadakan kuliah tamu yang menghadirkan narasumber yang expert di bidangnya masing-masing agar mahasiswa dapat memperoleh ilmu langsung dari para pakarnya. Departemen Sistem Informasi memiliki banyak sekali kegiatan tahunan seperti Information System International Conference atau ISICO dan Information System Expo atau IC.
Where your dealings not for free. Say it's clear, but I can't see. Girl, you're giving what I need. Where you take it all. She's got miles and miles from me. Put it on like it used to be. Don't just practice what you preach. I can't fake when you take hold of me. Take hold of me. I can't fake when you take hold of me. You take hold of me. You take hold of me. She's got miles and miles and miles from me. Put it on like it used to be. It's the way you beg and plead. I can't fake when you take hold of me. You take hold of me. I can't fake when you. I can't fake when you.
Okay, so Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning, Robert. How are you? Ya, makasih teman-teman. So saya cek dulu ya suaranya. So I hope that my voice is good, clear. So makasih teman-teman atas kehadirannya. Ini kita sudah melihat. I will use two languages, Robert, so I will use Indonesian and I also use English. We have 29 students and lecturers join now in a Zoom, and also we have 11 people join us in YouTube. Yeah. So yes, this is a series of the workshop about research methodology. So the background for this workshop is especially we need to rethinking again what is information system, what is the research methodology in information system, and of course when we look at all the methodology, finally we find that the most important or the basic thing that influence us when we decide we choose research method is any assumption, any belief that we have, yeah, about what is the truth, what is the phenomena, and how we can understand the truth or the phenomena. Ya, jadi teman-teman sekalian, ini adalah seri yang kedua, workshop riset yang kedua. Sesudah minggu yang lalu dengan Prof. Caroline Chan, kita sudah membahas tentang bagaimana menjadikan kegiatan-kegiatan pengabdian masyarakat kita, proyek kita menjadi penelitian dan kemudian menjadikan publish paper. Nah, saat ini kita akan diskusi ya, kita akan diskusi bareng apa sih sebenarnya yang mempengaruhi kita dalam meneliti. Gitu. Seperti kita tahu, di antara kita pasti ada yang memiliki keyakinan bahwa segala sesuatu itu adanya adalah pasti. Ya, bahwa kebenaran itu pasti. Kebenaran itu kalau enggak satu ya kosong gitu istilahnya ya. Dan kita kebanyakan orang computing seperti itu. Jadi kayak sistem digital, satu kosong. Kalau enggak benar ya pasti salah gitu. Dan kita percaya bahwa kebenaran itu hanya ada satu dan berlaku untuk semuanya. Sehingga pasti bisa digeneralisasi. Nah, ini ciri-ciri kita yang suka bertanya, apakah bagaimana kebenaran yang Anda sampaikan itu digeneralisasi, divalidasi, pakai metode apa gitu. Nah, itu biasanya kita akan menanyakan seperti itu. Dan biasanya itu adalah kita ketika kita percaya bahwa kalau kebenaran itu seharusnya diungkap dengan cara peneliti itu independen. Ya, jadi kalau orang nonton, kalau saya ngasih contoh orang nonton ikan di akuarium, maka kalau mau lihat perilaku ikan, ya mestinya peneliti itu ada di luar akuarium, jangan masuk ke dalam akuarium, gitu. Karena kebenaran itu independen, jadi manusia nggak boleh mempengaruhi, peneliti nggak boleh masuk. Nanti kalau masuk mempengaruhi ikannya, perilakunya menjadi berbeda, gitu. Nah, mungkin kita masuk dalam kategori itu bisa jadi. Tapi ada juga di antara kita yang percaya bahwa kebenaran itu nggak ada yang cuma satu. Ya, kebenaran itu sangat relatif, kebenaran itu sangat besar, gitu. Sehingga manusia itu tidak mampu mengungkap kebenaran secara utuh, ya. Sehingga pasti seorang peneliti itu akan hanya menemukan sebagian dari kebenaran. Oleh karena itu, di antara kita percaya bahwa kebenaran tergantung dari kemampuan pengalaman peneliti, kebenaran tergantung dari konteks penelitian itu, gitu ya. Dan kebenaran itu menjadi relatif tergantung konteksnya. Dan di antara kita percaya bahwa untuk menghasilkan kebenaran itu, peneliti malah harus masuk ke dalam lingkungan, gitu. Harus masuk ke dalam lingkungan. Jadi kalau istilahnya untuk melihat perilaku ikan tadi, peneliti harus masuk ke dalam air, kemudian tinggal bersama ikan itu, bersosialisasi dengan ikan, sehingga dia akan memperoleh semua kebenaran yang seringkali tidak terungkap. Nah, berbeda sekali kan ya. Namun ada juga yang nanti gabungan dari itu. Okay. So today we will talk about the research philosophy in information system, as we have had a discussion. I have a discussion with Robert when ICO. I hope that Robert remember our last discussion in ICO, last ICO. Robert, hello Robert, good morning. I'd like to say hi first to Robert. Robert, how are you today? Sorry, your voice, speaker.
It's because everybody was muted. That's fine. I'm fine. Very well, thank you.
Okay, so what time now is in Hong Kong? Sorry, just one for me to know what time is it?
10:15.
Oh, 10:15. Okay, good. So it's just one hour, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So Hong Kong is okay now, right? I mean,
Hong Kong is wonderful.
How is the COVID? Wonderful. Is it okay with the COVID case there?
There was 6 cases yesterday.
Wow, just 6. Yeah. Last week we have a workshop with Prof. Caroline San, and yeah, she was very happy. In Australia, it's also getting better. In Indonesia, actually, is getting better, but we I don't know. It's getting better, or we getting used to with the news of COVID. Yeah. So it's but yes. Okay. So today we will student of the postgraduate information system in ITS will join with us, and also the lecturers in information system ITS, and also actually via YouTube there are many lecturers from School of Information System in Indonesia. So we also invite many lecturers and researchers from a School of Information System as well. Okay. So I think as Robert said in the chat here, ya. So teman-teman, if you want to ask something, so it's okay. Jangan menunggu sampai presentasinya selesai. Boleh silakan Anda tuliskan in English or in Indonesia is fine. I will translate in English too. So ini adalah workshop sehingga teman-teman sangat terbuka untuk menyampaikan. Robert, I think at maybe 10:45 or another about 1 hour 15 minutes, we can have a break, maybe about 5 minutes, Robert. So you can take some break, or audience they can take some break about 5 minutes.
No problem.
Then we will play some video, yeah.
Okay.
So or any time that you want to have a break.
Okay.
Baik, teman-teman. So yeah, we have now 39 students and lecturer joins, and also in YouTube we have a 15. So it's about 60, yeah, about 60 participant now. Baik, now I'd like to introduce Robert, yeah. So here is we'll show you. Okay, so ada data yang lebih lengkap, ya. So this is a short information about Prof. Robert Davison. So Prof. Robert Davison is a professor in the Department of Information System. He teaches global IS knowledge management, qualitative research method, and also focus on the virtual knowledge management in City University of Hong Kong. And there are long achievement of Prof. Davison, Prof. Robert, yeah. You can access in internet. Will find it. Just type Robert Davison, and you will find long history, long achievement of him. But regarding the research, the top journal, now he is in charge as an editor-in-chief, Information System Journal in United Kingdom, ya. Beliau adalah editor in chief dari Information System Journal. Ini adalah Q1. As I check is Q1, ya. And also editor in chief dari Electronic Journal of Information System in Developing Country. Ini adalah Q3. Nah, banyak sekali beliau, dan beliau sangat peneliti di bidang sistem informasi, sehingga teman-teman nanti bisa menanyakan apapun, ya. Di sini akan ada 2 kali kita ketemu, Sabtu ini dan Sabtu belakang. Sabtu ini kita akan bicara filosofi, Sabtu belakang kita akan berbicara metodologi riset, gitu ya. Nah, tapi it's okay, Anda bisa tanyakan apapun. So you can ask anything related with IS research here. So you can just type in a chat, and then we will read, or maybe I can give you time to say directly to Prof. Robert Davison. So I think it's time for Robert to start the presentation. So Robert, would you please to start?
Sure.
Time is yours.
I'll share my slides. Okay. So today, let me minimize this. Okay. So this is the second of 4 workshops on information systems research. And today we're looking at research philosophy and its influence on research approach and method. And in particular, whether we want things to be inductive or deductive, whether we want qualitative or quantitative. These are the topic title that were provided to me. And so roughly speaking, this is what I'm going to talk about. I think that research philosophy is perhaps not the easiest subject. And so I will provide a more gentle introduction to this, but I also want to engage with you. And I'm looking forward to your thoughts or your questions, because it's the kind of topic where it's useful to have a discussion. I'm not very comfortable just talking for 3 hours, because I'm not sure that's going to be very useful. It's more useful if you can participate in the learning process, and we will all learn from each other. Okay, so for me, a research philosophy is just simply a way of thinking about research, a way of thinking about knowledge, and the way things are. And when I say the way things are, I mean the way things are in the world, the way things are in our minds, the way we use information systems, the way information systems create value. And the philosophy relates to how do we think about those things? Do we think about them in a very scientific way? Perhaps we think about them in terms of psychology or sociology. Do we look at them as being universally true? Everything works in the same way? Or do we take a more contextual approach, and we realize that different things will work in different ways in different contexts? So research philosophy has to incorporate ideas about how things are related to each other. And things here can include people, can include technologies, can include methods and theories. Any of the things which are involved are likely to be playing a role inside research philosophy. So in terms of how we apply the research philosophy to particular research situations, then I have these kinds of questions. If you discover how to do something, can your discovery, can the technique that you discover be applied successfully in other situations? Or is it only going to work in one way? If you have a technique for teaching students in Surabaya in Indonesia about how to work more effectively, how to accomplish some tasks more effectively, will your technique also work in Malaysia or Philippines or Hong Kong? Will it work in Europe? Or is something going to change? And your answer to this question is going to reveal something about your research philosophy, about the way you think about research. Maybe you used some research to create that technique. And of course, you're also using knowledge to create the technique. You're using your previous experience about what works and what doesn't work to create that technique. So is it going to work somewhere else? Or do we need to modify it? And we might modify it because of culture, because of society, because of law, because of religion, or may just be because of the environment more generally. And each of you would have a thought about this. Each of you must have some idea about what works and how you do things, and then how you translate knowledge from one place to another place. And my feeling is that your personal research philosophy has come from your background, your experience, your life, your family, your job. It's come from many places. It's influenced by many places. And I suppose in the future, it will keep changing. It will keep developing. But as we get older, as we become more stubborn, so it's perhaps a little bit harder to accept changes. And that can be a problem. Because as researchers, I think it's very important that we're always open-minded to being influenced by other people, other sources of information. And when I look at the research that we do, when I look at the different kinds of research topics, different kinds of research questions, different kinds of places where people do research. And I say this as an editor, because as an editor, I see a few hundred papers a year. I feel that there is an infinite variety of circumstances. It's impossible to imagine how many different situations there are relating to research and research ideas, research plans, and therefore research philosophy as well. So research philosophy is not just a topic that would be important for philosophers. It's also a topic that applies to each of us as individuals. And that may not be something you're sensitive to or something you're aware of. But I suggest it is there because I think each of us has a way of thinking about the world, a way of thinking about knowledge or about the things that we study. I can set you a task now. I can say, please go to the chat and please type one sentence about what is your research philosophy. Maybe it's a good exercise. Would you like to try that? I'm not sure what you're going to say. I have no idea. But I think you could say something about some of your fundamental beliefs about research. So how about we try that as a first exercise? I'm going to do this deliberately because I think it's useful for us to share. Now, what I'm trying to find out is whether I can get to the chat without stopping my screen sharing. Here we are. Okay, so Anna says critical realism. Not really a sentence, it's only 2 words. Could you explain what you mean by critical realism? Because maybe different people understand different things with the same words. And I hope that the other 42 people, 41 people in the session would also like to type something about What is their research philosophy?
Bu Amna, Bu Amna, Bu Amna, are you there? Amna, Bu. Okay. So,
Do you think anyone's going to type, or is everyone going to be shy? Ontologically realism, but epistemologically more closely related to interpretatism. Okay. Does anybody else have a contribution to this? What about Tony? What's Tony's research philosophy?
okay. Actually, because maybe my background is in engineering, so I have been taught to things, exact things. So I like to have something exact. I like quantitative. So yes, based on my experience, people need some certainty. So I am objective. My philosophy is objectivism. I'm trying to make everything clearly. Hopefully, just a single truth. Hopefully, but then, as our last discussion, and the more I study about information system, not just the engineering, when we talking about human being, when the technology used by the people, then I found that, look, there is no single truth. So then I'm becoming relativism. I mean, then
what?
relativism.
Relativism, yes. Okay.
Yes. So now, if you ask me which one, I'm objectivism or I'm relativism. I will try to be objectivism. Then when I observe if the subject of my research is human being or a social system, then I believe I'm relativism. So it's depend on the research subject.
Okay, so I just summarized your conversation in the chat. All right, maybe I should share my philosophy, but I didn't want to lead the conversation. I wanted people to share their own first before I say anything about myself. And so far, only Amna has shared anything. So I hope the other people will be brave and will share their thoughts.
Pureni want to share, Robert?
No problem. Go ahead.
Hello, Robert. Well, I was just wondering. I have a similar background to Tony, and I haven't really thought about what kind of research philosophy that I adhere to. So I don't know. I was wondering, is there any different kind of philosophies or things like that? So for me, since I'm strongly, hard engineering.
Okay, well, I mean, Tony, I typed Tony's words. He said exactness and quantitative and certainty and objectivism and single truth and so on. So those are some of the words he used to describe his thinking. And so, maybe you would agree, or maybe you'd have slightly different words.
So I was wondering if there's any contrasting philosophies to what I'm used to, or to what I know. So
I'm sure there are many. I'm sure there are many. If I speak for myself, I would certainly say qualitative, not quantitative. I would say subjectivism, not objectivism. I would never look for a single truth. I would look for multiple truths, because I think different people have different truths. And even although I'm not an engineer, even in information systems applications, I see multiple different ways of doing things, not just single ways of doing things. So certainly where you involve people, you make things more complicated, and some kind of relative view may be useful. Even if you're an engineer and you're doing product testing, or you're doing end user testing, I imagine that different users will have different opinions about the same product. And therefore, there is some relativism in there. Indeed, some products may have different interfaces for different types of users. Maybe some people like a complicated interface and some like a simple interface. So there may be some degree of relativism even within products. For something like certainty, to me, certainty is very cultural, in that in some cultures, people like things to be certain, and certainty makes life more stable. But there are also cultures where uncertainty is completely normal and people just accept that. So I think that's more of a personal value. I see myself as an interpretivist. I'm trying to make sense of the world as experienced by other people, the people I'm studying. And I accept that each of them may see the world in a different way. And I want to try and capture those different ways of seeing the world in order to build up theory, perhaps, some general rules about how the world can be seen. But I'm very reluctant to say this is the only way. I think it has to be more sophisticated than that. So I'm not very much in favor of single truth myself. It may exist in some situations, but I think that in general, single truth is not something I encounter very often. And I'm quite suspicious when people tell me this is the only way to do it. This is the only way to think. Everything else is wrong. I don't have much confidence in those kinds of statements.
Robert.
Yes.
So if you said that you believe that there is no single truth for the same single subject, yeah, for the single research subject, so it means that the question of generalization is not relevant anymore. I mean, we cannot ask the question about how your theory or theory in an information system or in your research will be applied in others research subject. It's not relevant.
It means that you have to approach generalization carefully. If you want to say my results will exactly 100% generalize to another context, then I think, right, it's not going to be quite that simple. But if you say other researchers in other contexts can look at my findings, can learn from my findings, can perhaps modify them so as to fit their own context better, then that's not pure generalization. It's generalization at a less pure level. So I think that research that's undertaken in one place can certainly be useful for other places and other people, but maybe not directly. Maybe it has to be modified. So the way that works in one place may not be the same way that works somewhere else. The method might need to change. The way of collecting data might need to change. The way of applying your findings might need to change. Not change 100%, but just change somewhat. I always used to use the example of how to cross the road as an example of what might have to change, because the way you cross the road varies from country to country. In some countries, there's not much traffic. It's quite safe to cross the road. You don't have to worry too much. In other countries, the traffic never stops, like in Indonesia. And so it is possible to cross the road, but you have to do it in a different way. So the result, crossing the road, is the same, but the method used to cross the road may change. I remember when I went to Vietnam and I found the traffic would never stop. If the traffic light is red or green, it makes no difference. The traffic still never stops. But the local people who cross the road, they walk slowly and predictably, and then the traffic flows around them. Nobody will hit them. So, but if you do that in America, you walk bravely across the road when the lights are green, you will certainly get hit. People won't care about hitting you. In fact, in some countries, they probably aim for you. So I think that we can look at any situation. If I look at decision making, how do people make decisions with IT? What kind of systems do they use? What kind of decisions do they make? And I then say, okay, so now I've studied decision making in Indonesia with university administrators, for example. Maybe my findings can apply to other university administrations in Indonesia. But do you think that university administrators in Hong Kong would do the same thing? Would they think in the same way? Would they use the same values? Would they rely on the same technology in the same way? I don't know. And if I change it not to be administrators, but I change it to bankers, or I change it to government officials, or I change it to farmers, different social groups of people may use technology in different ways in order to do different things. So this is why I'm cautious about generalization directly from one context to another context. I think it's more useful to generalize theory. So out of your study, you create a theory, and that theory can be tested in other places. And maybe it's true, it works. Maybe it's partly true, some things work, some things don't. Or maybe it doesn't work at all because it's so different. But theory can be a useful way of thinking about generalization.
Okay.
I'm a little bit disappointed that only 2 people have responded to my question.
Was that? Sorry.
Only you and Anna have responded to my question. Everybody else is silent. I think I'm going to have to pick on people.
Yeah, and also maybe they can say in Indonesia, maybe they're a bit of shy. So because this is talking about the philosophy of it, so I know that they're thinking maybe more in Indonesia. That's fine, talking in Indonesia, and I will translate in English. So Bapak Ibu, okay, so silahkan menyampaikan pendapatnya. Is okay dalam bahasa Indonesia atau dalam bahasa Inggris. Jadi kita lagi pertanyaan dari Prof. Robert adalah Bapak Ibu itu sekarang atau teman-teman yang mahasiswa itu sekarang cara mikir tentang kebenaran ya itu seperti apa menurut teman-teman? Apakah teman-teman ini orang-orang yang percaya bahwa kebenaran itu atau kenyataan ya kalau teman-teman neliti ya itu cuma ada satu ya satu tuh biasanya gitu kalau teman-teman ngelihat tesis ya ngelakuin tesis atau disertasi yang benar tuh kayak gini gitu ini hipotesa saya dan pasti nanti pertanyaannya adalah itu generalisasinya bagaimana validasinya bagaimana gitu jadi kalau ngambil sampel dari ITS mestinya bisa di generalisasi ke Indonesia gitu atau ke seluruh dunia mestinya teori itu ya satu berlaku untuk semua ataukah teman-teman ini lebih percaya bahwa kebenaran itu ya beda-beda tergantung konteksnya gitu atau teman-teman gabungan atau yang seperti apa nggak perlu nyebutin alirannya apa tapi minta tolong teman-teman share ya so you don't need to say about the term for your philosophy so that's fine. Let's talk about what the truth, what the phenomenon you believe in the world. In Indonesian, that's fine, yeah. And then I will translate in English for Robert. So silakan teman-teman sharing ya, karena ini workshop kita belajar bareng. Saya pengen mendengar yang ahli ini dulu, filosofi dulu. Robert join with us is the head of our department, Pak Dr. Mujahidin. So he is very high philosopher ya. So It's okay Pak Muda. In Indonesia or in English that's fine. Nanti teman-teman juga boleh. Ini tentang filosofi riset teman-teman. Nah ini we challenge ya. Kita pengen dengar, nggak apa-apa. Kita pengen dengar. Karena ini yang mempengaruhi apa? Semua metodologi kita sebenarnya. Sadar nggak sadar mempengaruhi. Boleh Pak Muda berpendapat?
Ya, saya menyapa dulu pada Pak Division ya. Mohon izin. Good morning, Mr. Division. My name is Eugene.
Hi.
In this morning, I thanks to Mr. Division for workshop about information system research that organized by Mr. Tony as head of graduate program in information system department. And then we also thanks Mr. Division have agreed to become a member of advisory board in our department. We really appreciate for you. In this morning, we hope this workshop can improve our skill in conducting good research and writing in a high quality publication, and especially for information system research. Saya juga tidak lupa mengucapkan assalamualaikum kepada para hadirin semua, kepada Bapak Ibu serta workshop. Terima kasih atas partisipasinya dan kehadirannya pada acara hari ini. Saya juga mengucapkan banyak terima kasih ini kepada Pak Tony ya sebagai pemerakarsa acara ini. Terima kasih pada Bu Mahendra, Bu Raras, ya, Bapak Ibu yang lain. Once again, I would like thanks to Mr. Division, and saya ucapkan terima kasih juga kepada Bapak Ibu semua hadirin. I wish all of us always healthy and happy. Terkait tadi ya Pak ya, saya juga.
Ya.
Jadi ya saya ngawur aja bahasa Indonesia aja ya, enggak. Kalau bahasa Inggris nanti.
Ya Pak.
Galihnya enggak keluar kalau saya itu bahasa Inggris.
Ya. Karena ini filosofi Pak, agak dalam ini.
Ya. Kebenaran itu kan ada, menurut saya ada 3 macam ya. Ada kebenaran pribadi, ada kebenaran orang banyak, dan ada kebenaran yang sifatnya itu hakikat ya, yang kebenaran sejati. Ya, manusia itu apapun tingkatan atau kualitas ilmunya yang paling tinggi adalah mencapai kebenaran bersama aja. Belum sampai mencapai kebenaran yang paling absolut itu tidak ada. Itu hanya Tuhan itu. Ya, walaupun itu seorang mazhab besar pun itu tetap itu hanya suatu kebenaran yang milik bersama, dianggap orang banyak itu benar sehingga diimplementasikan. Jadi sifatnya kebenaran itu adalah masih qot'i ya. Masih prasangka, mungkin benar gitu kan ya. Belum doni. Kalau doni itu sudah mutlak benar, itu tidak ada itu. Yang punya kebenaran tunggal itu ya Tuhan aja. Nah, yang kita tandingkan ini itu bukan kebenaran sebenarnya. Jadi kita itu masing-masing berhak punya kebenaran ya. Punya pendapat. Mr. Division punya pendapat tentang riset itu bagaimana. Mr. Chan itu bisa juga punya pendapat yang lain. Nanti Pak Tony juga bisa membuat kebenaran sendiri ya. Nah, itu nanti kan kita adu. Yang diadu kan bukan kebenarannya, tapi kebaikannya. Ya. Jadi wastahbikul khairatnya. Yang kita wastahbikulkan itu kan khairnya, kebaikannya. Kalau masalah kebenaran nggak usah ditandingkan. Lah, Indonesia itu gitu, masih salah kaprah ya. 212 punya kebenaran, kemudian 213 punya kebenaran, 214 punya kebenaran. Ditandingkan itu kebenarannya itu. Akhirnya crash. Ya. Padahal nggak bisa, yang kita tandingkan itu adalah kebaikannya, ya. Sehingga nanti kalau dipraktekkan dalam kasus yang spesifik ya terkait dengan metodologi riset itu juga ada banyak nantinya, ya. Beda-beda tiap orang itu, tiap madzhab beda-beda. Madzhabnya katakanlah di Elsevier itu beda dengan kalau di Emerald, beda kan? Ya. Di tempat yang lain beda, nggak apa-apa. Tapi yang kita adukan ya tadi itu adalah kebaikannya. Ya. Bahkan nanti keindahannya yang kita anukan, yang kita lombakan. Jadi saya kira sah-sah saja itu. Masing-masing punya kebenaran, dan kebenaran itu adalah sifatnya tadi itu ya, doni ya, masih BBE benar gitu kan.
Oke.
Dan tidak usah kita itu apa ya, memberikan kebenaran dengan menyalahkan orang lain, tidak usah ya. Biarkan kebenaran itu independen. Artinya kita punya kebenaran, tapi tidak usah menyalahkan kebenaran orang lain. Yuk tanding, tapi khairnya Pak. Khair. Jadi khair itu kan kebaikannya.
Okay.
Ya gitu aja sementara.
Okay, good. Robert, Pak Dr. Muja believe that actually the truth, the phenomena can be perceived with a very variety way, with a different way, with a different people. So he said that actually the truth, based on his opinion, is there is a 3 levels. Yeah, he believes 3 levels. First is the truth for himself, for himself. So the individual level, and the second level is the truth for public, for majority, and the truth, and the top level is the truth, the real truth that just belong to God. So as you know that we believe the real truth is just God that know the truth. So, and he said that the human being just can understand, just can achieve the truth, the majority truth. So there is no 100% truth. So that's why he believes that one truth or one phenomena for someone will be different with other phenomena from other people. So we should respect to the truth based on the one person, and most important, according him, is we focus on the benefits of the theory, or benefit that of the theory of the truth he said, rather than we confront about the truth. So that's what he believes.
Okay, that's useful.
Yeah.
If you look at the theory level, to me, a useful theory is one which is easy to understand. It's one that we can apply. We can do something with it. We can benefit from it in some way. So it may be a truthful theory, but if nobody understands it, that's a problem. So somehow the truth has to be communicated in a way that people can understand it. And that may be a problem sometimes. So particularly as a journal editor, I get people who write in, they submit their papers, and I just can't understand what's going on here because the communication is not so good. And so then that becomes another issue. It's partly the personal level, but it's also partly the communication level. It's not really research philosophy, it's communication of research philosophy. Anyway, let me go on, I think. I'll stop talking about the truths here. But I'm hoping that this sharing from different people will share that each of us can see research philosophy in a slightly different way. And how, as we learn, as we go through life, we experience things that may influence the way we think about that philosophy. I wrote in this slide, I'll be quite surprised if you change anything because of today. You might, but I'm not expecting you to, because it takes a long time to make those kinds of changes. Philosophy is certainly connected with education. Tony, you mentioned this indirectly because you're an engineer and therefore you tend to think in certain ways. And if you belong to a society of engineers who all think in similar ways, then you will all reinforce each other. Your philosophy will be connected to the philosophy of the other engineers because you share things together, you do things together. When people work together and think together and live together, they tend to develop normative styles of thinking and behavior. They tend to think and behave in the same way, quite unconsciously, simply because they're influencing each other all the time, and maybe because they want to conform. They don't want to be too different compared to others, because if you're different, then you may get excluded or isolated. I'm not sure how that's going to change with the pandemic, because if we cannot work together, we cannot meet and live and eat and chat together, but we're all working at home, then we're losing some of that connectedness. And I think the research philosophy of the group depends on being able to communicate with the group. And when you lose the communication, then perhaps the research philosophy will break down because it won't be reinforced all the time. So I think philosophy is very much a human kind of thing, and it's something associated with groups, not with individuals. The gentleman who was speaking just now mentioned the personal level, the group level, and the God level. But even at the personal level, you're still influenced by what happens at the group level. It's unlikely that you are totally thinking in isolation by yourself. And when you belong to a group, then inside the group, there are unlikely to be many changes or any threats to challenge the thinking style. But actually, all of us live in multiple groups. We have a work group, we have a professional group, we have a home group, we may have a play group. Play here not only for children, but for adults. Maybe you play golf, or maybe you go swimming, or maybe you join friends or to go hiking. There are different groups. And perhaps each group will have a different way of thinking about things. And so I suggest that those different groups we belong to will also influence research philosophy, because they influence the way we think about the world. And I want you to ask this question: is there any connection between life inside and life outside research in terms of philosophy? Are we consistent? Is Tony the engineer also an engineer when he's at home or when talking to children? Do the same values translate from the research context to the home context? Or are there multiple Tonys, multiple Roberts, that when I'm in the research context, I do one thing, and when I'm at home, I do something else? This is the kind of situation that is interesting because it makes us ask questions about consistency. Many years ago, I remember talking to a very senior IS professor in Singapore, and he would be quantitative, objective, positivist, and he told me that it's very dangerous to study culture because culture is very messy. It's much easier in research to ignore culture, to assume that culture doesn't matter. But then when we went for dinner at the end of the day, and he talked about Singaporean culture, I could see that he had a very deep understanding of culture, but he didn't want that understanding of culture to influence his research. And so I found a certain disconnection between his life inside and his life outside. He was able to separate them. As a good researcher, as a good professor, he would have one set of values. And he was very successful in publishing research based on those values. When he went home, he had a completely different set of values, maybe even an opposite set of values. And those values at home enabled him to be a very successful home person. And he could live in both worlds perfectly from his own point of view. And yet I saw a disconnection. And I wondered, how do we reconcile this? How do we resolve it? Is it a problem to have different values in different places? Or is it entirely reasonable? That's a very hard question to answer, because you need to share something about yourself inside research and outside research. And you need to think, do I, as a researcher, have values which I also have when I'm at home or when I'm with my friends? Or do I have different values in different places? So I'm not going to ask you to type about this. I'm just going to suggest the question to think about something. When you go outside your comfort zone, when you go outside your research environment, then the situation is not so easy to be controlled because you're subject to influences of other people. And today we're all on Zoom, but all of you are exposed to me and the way I'm thinking. And you may not agree with me. You may think I'm wrong, and that's absolutely fine. But I hope that if you do think I'm wrong, you can explain why you think I'm wrong. Maybe I'm challenging your values. Maybe my values are so different from your values that that's a problem. Now, another problem is that I have multiple roles in research. Not only I'm a researcher as an individual, but also I'm an editor and I'm a reviewer. And so when you write your research, I suggest that your research to some extent will reflect your values, your way of thinking. And so your research papers will also reflect your thinking. And when you submit them to a journal or a conference, they're going to be reviewed by people who may think in very different ways. That can be a problem. Because if your readers, if your reviewers don't really understand you or don't agree with you, don't share the same way of thinking, then that creates a potential conflict. And it's a conflict that's beyond your control. The only thing you can do is to submit to a very narrow range of journals where you have some confidence that the reviewers and the editors are more closely aligned with your way of thinking. And you don't submit to the journals which are likely to be very different to your way of thinking. And I suspect that all of us do this unconsciously. It's certainly true for me that I know what kind of research I do. I know what kind of reviewers and editors I would like to look at my papers. And that means there are some journals I will never submit to, at least until they change. Because when I look at those journals today, the people who work there, the kinds of papers they publish, are completely alien to the kinds of things I want to do. And I certainly don't want to modify what I do so as to fit their alien requirements. So all of this is leading me in the direction of how do we transition from research philosophy to research action? And I'm going to suggest that because you have a research philosophy, because you have a way of thinking about research, that will influence what kind of research you do and how you do it. It will influence what kind of questions you ask and how you answer those questions. And it may mean there are some questions that you never ask. Maybe because you're not comfortable with the question, maybe because you don't know how to answer the question, at least using your own research philosophy. And I think that the research philosophy is deep inside us, and it's very powerful. It influences many things about what we do and how we do them. And so when a few minutes ago I asked you to write down what is your philosophy, I was asking you to write down what is the value that you have that influences how you do research. I could say, why do you do research in this way? Why not another way? And your answer would be, because these are my values. This is my research philosophy. This is how I think research should be done. The words epistemology and doxology are somewhat related to this. We use the word epistemology quite a lot in research, and it refers to what we know to be true. But it's what we as individuals know. It's not a universal truth. It's a personal truth. A personal truth about knowledge, about the nature of knowing, about knowing how things are related to each other. And of course, the two major research philosophies in Western science are often referred to as positivism and interpretivism. And effectively, these are looking at epistemology. Doxology refers to what we believe to be true, but we don't actually have any evidence yet. And maybe we never will have evidence, but we can still believe it to be true. But for me, research is making the transition from what we believe to be true to what we know to be true. It's going from belief, I think it should be like that, to knowledge. I know it is like that because I have evidence for it. And so there are different ways of making that transition. When Tony told us that he believes in objectivism and single truth and so on, those are beliefs about how things are, about what he knows to be true. And when I said that personally I prefer subjectivism and interpretivism and uncertainty and so on, those are my beliefs about what I know to be true. And so there are different ways of creating truth, different ways of relying on information and resources to create that truth and to make the transition from belief to knowledge. And so positivism and interpretivism both address that shift, that transition from belief to knowledge. And so the two research philosophies, which you could have mentioned, but nobody did, are also very much relevant to this discussion. So positivists tend to believe that reality is stable and we can observe it in an objective way. Perhaps it's an engineering viewpoint. And when we observe it, we're not changing the phenomenon. We're not changing the thing that we're studying. Positivists like to isolate the thing they're studying, and they expect that any observations that they reach should be repeatable. Other researchers should be able to reach the same observations, reach the same conclusions, if they also repeat the study in the same way. So this then leads us to a science of predictability, a science of observation and predicting how things will be. Positivism has been very, very dominant in Western scientific thought. Rudy Hirschlein in 1985 talks about positivism being so embedded that knowledge claims not grounded in positivist thought are dismissed as unscientific and they're invalid. Now, that's a long time ago, but many people would still think like that today. 1992 review of 900 IS research articles, all of them were positivist. And today, the number would not be the same, but even today, I guess certainly 90% of IS research is positivist. That's what I see as a journal editor. The vast majority are positivist. When I talk to my PhD students, I teach classes of PhD students in Hong Kong. Almost every single student will be positivist. Every single student will have a positivist way of thinking about the world and will feel very uncomfortable when I suggest that there is a different way of thinking. They're not interested. I think part of the reason is because their supervisors are also positivist, and the supervisors don't allow them to think in any other way, or certainly don't encourage them to think in any other way. Positivism is strongly associated with physical sciences, natural sciences, but it's also being closely connected with the social sciences. And yet there are people who ask, is positivism really good? Is it really suitable for social sciences and for IS? And is positivism the best way of developing knowledge related to information systems? And the reason why people ask this question is because of a concern that when you involve people, and we talked about this earlier, when you introduce people into the equation, you start to create a large measure of uncertainty because different people will think and behave in different ways. And when you have people and technology, then the variance that is created by bringing people who have different ways of thinking, different values, may cause problems. Because if we assume that all people are the same, is that really a valid assumption? If we assume that we can study a technology and the people who use the technology, and that the observations we make in one place will also translate into similar observations in a different place, is that realistic? So this is my second question for you. I put some questions at the end about why IS researchers favor positivism, what are the limits of positivism, but the real question is why? Why is it perhaps a problem to rely so much on positivism? Or what are we missing because we rely so much on positivism?
Okay.
So I wonder if anybody would like to address that.
Yeah. Let's ask some friend here, yeah, Robert, yeah, to give opinion, yeah.
Yeah.
Pak Apol, I think it will be interesting. Listen your opinion, Pak Apol.
Yes.
Jadi pertanyaannya tentang positivism, ya, kepastian segala sesuatu itu stabil, gitu. Nah, terkait dengan sistem informasi yang di situ ada interaksi antara teknologi dengan manusia. Jadi ketika di antara kita percaya bahwa everything stabil, everything bisa digeneralisasi, segala sesuatu itu sama. Ada di mana batasnya ya? Where is the limit when we use positivism for human being interaction between people and technology? What do you think?
I'm listening at this moment, Pak Tony.
Yeah.
I am listening.
Yeah,
Maybe later I can.
Nggak apa-apa. Nggak, Bapak begini ya, sorry. Percaya bahwa semuanya bisa di satu objek itu sama antar objek yang lain atau berbeda, Pak? Simple itu aja dulu. Apakah satu fenomena di satu interaksi manusia dengan teknologi, satu subjek itu sama atau berbeda? Lebih cenderung kemana dulu?
If there is a mathematical situation, yes, 1 + 1 is 2. But if there is a social situation, let's say there is involved people, human organization, or something that there is not exactly mathematics. So, yeah, we should understand that there is probably different perception.
Okay, good. Interesting, yeah.
Yeah,
so, Pak Apol believe that it depends on if you can create some formula, mathematics, and that formula will be the same. So yes, there will be positivism, but when relate with the people or the social system, he believed that there is no a single formula, mathematical formula for all the social system. So that's becoming the challenge for the positivism for the information system. Kita minta pendapat lagi ya. Nggak apa-apa, kita di sini sharing teman-teman. Yang Pak Dr. Bambang pengen dengar Pak Bambang Setiawan. Boleh Pak sharing Pak? Are you there Pak Bambang Setiawan? Atau kita panggil Bu Mahe, ada Bu Mahe? Bu Bahe ada Bu? So I will read opinion from we have some friends or lecturer who join with us. Now they are study in abroad. Ini dari Bu Amna and Pak Arif ya. They said the problem with positivism is that it tend to make the observation superior. Anything that is not observed from the empirical work should be treated not reality. Indeed, this view could be problematic because the tool we use to observe can be imperfect. Ya, jadi sangat tergantung dengan tool kita, gitu. Jadi apapun yang tidak bisa ditangkap dianggap tidak bisa. Any comment from student? Saya coba nyapa siapa ya? Rahman, ada Rahman ya? Abdurrahman. Halo, Abdurrahman. Abdurrahman, are you there?
Ya Pak.
Ya, pendapatmu menurut kamu, Rahman, terserah in English or in Indonesia, that's fine. Ya, boleh dalam bahasa Indonesia, bahasa Inggris. Kalau in your opinion, kira-kira tadi kalau sudah membaca ya, mudah-mudahan ngikutin yang positivism itu segala sesuatu itu stabil, sesuatu itu cuma satu, itu bisa digeneralisasi, objeknya mesti diisolasi gitu untuk bisa melihat itu sebagai sebuah kebenaran. Tapi itu terchallenge sebenarnya, menjadi pertanyaan ketika kita ingin melihat interaksi tentang manusia dan terutama ada aspek manusia dan teknologi, itu sebenarnya tidak bisa sama antar satu dengan yang lain. Pendapat kamu gimana?
Setuju Pak dengan itu Pak. Karena kan kita pasti punya pendapat berbeda Pak dengan teknologi yang ada Pak. Dan tergantung juga pengalaman pribadi masing-masing Pak.
Oke, cool, excellent. Baik, so yep, Robert, there is a opinion from our student that yes, he believed that it's depend on the observer, yeah, depend on the researcher. My student believe that we cannot generalize something, yeah, for all people, all the situation, yeah. But I think your statement in your presentation, this is very interesting. IS is closer to social science than the physical science. Yeah, I think it will a bit provoke some or most of the IS lecturers in Indonesia. I mean, like, because their background is computing, and there is a pride of the computing people that they look, we are not social science people. I'm sorry to say, in Indonesia, starting from the high school, we have been classified. So if you are good student, you go to the science classes, you go to the engineering classes, something like that, science classes. If you are not, your mark is not really good, so you go to the social science classes. So we have been educated in Indonesia. We have, by the system, we have been educated the deep, making a level between science or engineering, exact science, and social science. In our mind, we realize or not, for Indonesian, most people, they think that social science is lower than science or exact science, something like that. So your statement that the IS is closer to the social science is like provoke many.
It's an insult.
Yeah, insult many IS lecturers who has a background in computing. who has studied very hard to go to the exact science classes, and then pass many examinations to go down, and then finally you said, no, you are social science people. What do you say?
It's my opinion. It's only my opinion. I apologize if I've offended anybody.
but that's good. I mean, we want to hear about, because that's the thing that we believe, because that's the system make us in Indonesia has a dichotomy between exact science and the social science, and the social science is less less complex, or much more simple than exact science. Then we believe that
I would say the opposite. I would say social science is much more complicated than natural or physical science.
Okay.
Because as soon as you bring people into the equation, things get very, very complicated, because people have so much variation. So I put some replies to Amna's comment, and I said, if we rely on a theory to observe a phenomenon, then we can only measure what the theory allows us to measure. We can't measure anything else. So I see this in a lot of Indonesian research that's submitted to IS journals. It's very positivist, it's very science-like. They take a theory, and something like TAM is very popular, or UTAUT, in order to measure, do people have the interest or the intention to use some technology? And the theory may have 4 or 5 variables, and they collect data on those 4 or 5 variables, but nothing else. And as a result, they can test the theory, does it work or not? But they can't really tell us anything about Indonesia, because the theory doesn't allow them to tell us anything about Indonesia. And so all of the local context is completely lost. And I learned nothing about Indonesia as a result of reading the paper. I only learned that an American theory can be tested in Indonesia, and that's not very interesting. So it becomes a problem if the research that you're doing is not synchronized with the expectations of the journal that you're submitting to. That's where the problem's going to be. It's not really about science or social science. It's about expectation management. And so you need to be able to do the research in a way that the editors and the reviewers are looking for or are expecting. And if the way you do the research is completely different, and in their opinion adds very little value, then that's going to be a problem. So I'm not saying you're right or wrong. I'm not saying that you're a positivist or an interpretivist. It doesn't really matter. But I am saying you need to think about the expectations of the journal you're submitting to. So if you send to a computer science journal, it's probably fine. If you send to an IS journal, it may be problematic. And for Electronic Journal of IS in developing countries, my guess is that we accept 1 paper out of 20 submitted from Indonesia. But we probably accept 1 paper out of 4 across the world. The Indonesian papers generally are not accepted. And one reason is because of this mismatch between the way the research is done and the expectations of the reviewers. So just yesterday, I rejected a paper from Indonesia. And the paper was telling me how to build a cybersecurity framework. Now, there's nothing wrong with the topic, but the paper is submitted to Electronic Journal of Information Systems in Developing Countries. So I expect it should be somehow relevant to developing countries, because that's the purpose of the journal. But in the whole article, there is no mention of any developing country anywhere. The whole paper is only about cybersecurity. Even though the authors are in Indonesia, there's nothing Indonesian about the paper. If you did the same research in America or Argentina or Antarctica, it will be the same. So why this journal? It's the wrong journal. If you send to a journal on information security, it's probably fine. No problem. But if you send to a journal which says, we want to publish papers which have context, we want the developing country context, and you don't have one, then it doesn't fit. It's a fit problem. So I'm not criticizing the research. The research is not bad, but it doesn't fit the journal. And if the author writes to me and says, but I live in a developing country, therefore I can submit my article to you, I'm going to say, that's not enough. It's not enough to live there. You also have to write about it. It's not enough just that you collect data there, but I also want to know, what is Indonesian about data security? How do Indonesian organizations create different data security policies so as to be sensitive to the Indonesian environment? Do they? I don't know if they do or not, but my guess is they probably do. But Tony, maybe you have an answer to that. Do you think information security or data security is different in Indonesia compared to other countries? And does that difference have anything to do with culture?
Yes. Again, I interested that it's more important to write in a paper first about the context of our research subject. So, for example, in this case, it's about the security system or framework for the information security in Indonesia. So, I think for the author is first he need to explain the context of Indonesia. If he observe more and he present more about the Indonesian, look, the Indonesian, or maybe can be transferred to other country, developing country, is more the social interaction, the social what is called connection is very strong, very strong. They're very easy to trust to stranger, like they don't really aware about their privacy, because in our culture almost we don't have privacy. Something like it's a common that people asking about what's your name, what is your mother's name, how old are you, what's your birth date, something like that. That's a common, and it is impolite. Yes. And it's impolite if in Indonesia we don't answer it, or it's impolite if someone suddenly call you and said, hey, how are you now? And he just pretending to be your friend, and we said that, and we answer like, I don't know you, who are you? It's something like unpolite in our culture.
Okay.
Then it become interesting, or something new, maybe for the theory, when we observe information security framework for this kind of social system. So
I have to apologize, because I put you in a difficult position. You're an engineer, and you believe in single truths, and I'm telling you, and you're telling me that sometimes it doesn't work. But that's why I say social sciences, because you're dealing with people, and different people in different cultures will have very, very different ways of thinking. And so the notion of privacy in Indonesia, the notion of privacy in other countries may be quite different. And therefore, any information security framework needs to reflect that. You can't have a framework that doesn't make any reference to what works in the local context. Otherwise, the framework won't work. It won't be useful. And to me, understanding the human side, the social side, the cultural side, makes this part of social sciences. If you don't like that, and you want to be natural sciences or physical sciences or engineering, then I guess you just don't study people at all. But the risk is that because you don't study people, therefore you don't understand people. And therefore you don't know what is the impact of people on what you're doing. And then the risk is that you've done all this wonderful work, but no one likes it because it doesn't fit the culture. That's my concern. So I think at least some level of awareness of the culture is important. And maybe it can help to inform the design as well. so that when the design is finished, it's going to be relevant for the local culture, for the local people, and it's more likely to be accepted by them. That's really how I'm thinking.
Robert, sorry, can I ask something?
Yes.
So it's a bit challenging, yeah, when we say that in information system is more subjectivism, yeah, because this is information system research will deal with people and technology, interaction between people and technology, so it's more subjectivism than positivism. That implicitly I understand from your opinion. So I think, but people still try to ask the researcher, how can I apply your finding to my context, to my to other research subject. So I think this is very, very important for IS research to explain first about the context of the research subject, then just talking about the finding, in order to convince or to help other readers who read their finding, then how can apply their the findings in other situation or in other subject. So what do you think? Is it so it's more important, it's very important for all the IS research to describe the context, to describe, to explain about the research subject first, or in the end of the research, rather than just talking, analyzing the finding?
I would prefer first, because it helps the reader to make sense of the whole paper. If you leave it to the last moment, if you put it in the limitations, many people put it in the limitations, then it's really too late.
Good.
But when I say this, I realize that I am quite isolated. Most people would not agree with me. So I'm giving you my opinion. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying this is my opinion about how things should be. But when I look at IS research more generally, in most published IS research articles, the context is not mentioned, or mentioned very briefly. In the introduction, there's nothing. In the literature review, there's nothing. In the method, maybe you see the method because we collected data in China, or we collected data in Indonesia. And that's the first time for a context to be mentioned when I get to the method. And to me, that's a bit late. I think it's necessary to mention the method, to mention the context a little bit earlier in the introduction, and to explain why. Why is this context appropriate for the research question? Why is it an appropriate place to collect data? Because if it's not appropriate, then I have no confidence in any part of the study. So to me, it's important. But as I say, probably 90% of IS researchers would disagree with me. And so one of my questions here is, why do IS researchers so strongly favor positivism? And implicitly, why do they not want to write about context? And I don't have a good answer to this question. I don't think it's brainwashing. I don't think it's stupidity, but it's some kind of culture. And cultures can be very, very strong to drive people to behave in certain ways. And if you want to do things in a different way, if you want to be abnormal, you have to be really strong yourself to have the confidence to be abnormal. Because in many societies, normal people are appreciated and abnormal people are feared, or are criticized, or are punished, or they suffer in some way. So it's easier to be normal. It's easier to be like everybody else. And actually, everybody else also includes the reviewers. Most reviewers are also positivist. Most editors are also positivists. So if the whole world is positivist, why should I do things differently? That's the challenge. So research philosophy is a personal thing. It's your personal belief about how to do things based on your personal values. But those values are probably influenced by other groups, the groups that you belong to, at a personal level or a society level. Or they may be influenced by the whole society generally. So my purpose today is definitely not to tell you what's right and wrong, because I don't have those answers. My purpose is only to make you think and to think about these things. If you think about it, then I will consider it successful. We're going to have a break soon, but let me just go on a little bit. So interpretivists would suggest that only when you try to make sense of reality can you understand that reality. And that making sense has to be subjective. It's subjective by you, it's you making sense. And the reality is not just one thing, it's multiple people, multiple objects. And you need to look at the relations between those objects in order to make sense of it. Sometimes you may need to intervene. You're not just looking at it, but you're getting involved. You're working in the reality. And there's also the acknowledgement that when a scientist or a researcher goes to study a phenomenon, the phenomenon may be about people and technology, it's very hard not to affect the people in some way. If I go and collect data from people, whether it's a survey or it's an interview, as soon as the people start to answer my questions, they also have to think. My questions may make them think. And when they think, then they may also change, because they may realize that the question may push them to think in a new way, a way they've never thought about before. So if these are people who are using an ERP system in an organization, and I'm saying in my questions, I say, please tell me what you don't like about the ERP system. Please tell me how those negative things influence the way you work. And those kind of questions may threaten them, may be uncomfortable. They may not want to answer that question because it may challenge their belief. It may challenge what they think is true. And they don't want to be challenged. So when researchers get into a research situation and start asking questions, it's quite likely that unconsciously, not intentionally, they will be changing certainly the people who they are studying, because those people are going to interact with them. Even if it's only a survey, they will still have to interact. Now, I asked you to look at this paper. And it's a paper which I picked because it is both positivist and interpretivist. It's a paper which is doing a reanalysis of data collected for a previous paper, I think 8 years previously. The first paper, which is Dennis et al. 1998, was a positivist study. The second paper, Lee and Dennis, 2012, is an interpretivist study. And I asked you to look at this. Now, I'm wondering how many people actually read this article, which I asked you to read. Can anyone honestly say that they read the whole article? I assume that in this case, silence means, I'm sorry, I didn't.
I didn't. It's Dennis with
Did anyone read the abstract? I think I know at least one person read the abstract because she told me. So this is your homework. You need to read this article sometime. It doesn't have to be today. It can be whenever you want. But I picked this article because in the 1998 paper, it was a positivist study. And it was a lab experiment, and the researchers were using students as research subjects in order to do some group decision-making. It was a group decision-making task. They had some hypotheses. The hypotheses were based on literature. So this is the research model, theory. And most of the hypotheses were rejected. So that's interesting from a positivist sense, because normally you would expect the hypothesis to be accepted, or most of them to be accepted. And in the 1998 paper, the researchers were very puzzled. Why were all our hypotheses rejected? What went wrong? What was wrong with this design? And they never had a good answer. In the 2012 paper, Alan Lee co-authored with the original Alan Dennis to reanalyze some of the data collected during that study. And they looked at the qualitative data, which had been collected but not reported in the 1998 paper. And they were then able to explain why the hypotheses had been rejected. And what happened is that the students in the original 1998 paper had not followed instructions. The researchers had given them instructions, and the students had simply said, no, those instructions are boring, we're going to do our own things. And so the students had all been to a party the night before, and they continued the conversation of the party inside the lab experiment. So they completely ignore the protocol, they completely ignore what they're supposed to do, and perhaps not surprisingly, the research hypotheses are rejected. You'll need to read the whole paper in order to understand the whole story. And so the conclusion from this reanalysis of the data is that it's very dangerous to use students as research subjects. One reason is because they're human, and therefore they don't always do what they're told. They don't follow instructions. They don't behave in the way you expect them to behave. But actually, it's very, very common that students are used as research subjects. And therefore, this study raises a big question mark. Is it really a good idea? I said it's dangerous. I think it's more than dangerous. It's maybe fatal to use them, but it's still common. What can we do about that? And so in the paper, Alan Lee and Alan Dennis suggest that research subjects, such as students, must always be appropriate for the research design. It's not appropriate to ask students to pretend to be decision makers, or to pretend to be bankers, or to pretend to be CEOs, because they're not. There's no way a student can imagine what it's like to be a CEO, to understand the thinking style of a CEO, to worry about profits, to worry about losing their job. Students can't lose their jobs if they make mistakes, but CEOs can certainly lose their jobs if they make mistakes. So if you want to study CEOs, don't borrow students and ask them to pretend to be CEOs, because you won't find anything useful. Certainly nothing useful you could apply to CEOs. So it's appropriate for the research subjects to be closely linked to the research design. And in the particular case of the 1998 paper, I think a key reason for the hypotheses to be rejected is because the researchers didn't think about their data collection. They thought about it in terms of the literature. They didn't think about it in terms of where is the data going to come from. It may not be a bad design, because it was from a hypothesis point of view, but it was a bad design from a data collection point of view. And the situation that happened is completely outside the imagination and the control of the researchers. There's nothing they can do about it. So if you invite students to come into a study, you can expect them to behave like students. You can't expect them to behave like anyone else. And that may have influence on the way you design your study. It may mean that some studies cannot be done because you can't collect the data. Or it may be some studies can be done because you can collect the data. So for example, if you want to study how students learn online learning systems or how students use Zoom, I think that's fine. Because students do use Zoom. They do use online learning systems, and it's perfectly suitable to use students as research subjects. They understand Zoom, even if they don't like it. So I see there are some chat comments. Oh, well, I see two in Bahasa, which I don't understand.
Yeah.
And then you say good question, and then he said thank you. All right. Well, maybe you can tell me what the question is.
Yeah.
And after this question, we'll have a break after this question.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I think we will have a break. But before break, I will just highlight some interesting statement ya from Robert ya. Teman-teman, this is very interesting ya, very interesting. So be aware when we pick student as a research subject ya. Jadi hati-hati teman-teman ketika mengambil mahasiswa sebagai research subject kita ya. Ini sangat betul-betul menohok sekali untuk hampir banyak tesis ya atau disertasi kita, karena so we used to take a student as a research subject because it is the easiest way we get the participant, because the student is on control of the lecturers, of control of other student. So we used to pick student as a participant, but in here Robert highlight very dangerous because what? Because student is student. Student is student. Jadi mahasiswa ya mahasiswa. Mahasiswa sangat susah untuk kita minta, misalnya ini menarik buat saya. Misalnya untuk e-government ya, in e-government. So it's quite interesting statement from Robert that when I ask student, okay, now you behave as a e-government user, like a citizen, something like that. Implicitly, Robert said that it's quite difficult for a student really 100% behave as a 100% citizen. They will behave like a student. I mean, they still have their character as a student will always influence or more lead the behavior rather than as a pure citizen, something like that. So it's more difficult for student if we ask student to do some management level roles ya. Jadi makin susah aja ketika teman-teman meminta mahasiswa sebagai narasumber untuk peran-peran di manajemen. Ini makin nggak mungkin aja gitu. Jadi nah ini menarik teman-teman, karena ketika kita mau memilih, when we want to choose the research subject, be aware that it is about our research design and whether the research subject is really represented our hypothesis or not ya. Jadi betul-betul merepresentkan dari hipotesa kita atau tidak. Kalau itu memang jangan paksa mahasiswa untuk memainkan role di luar dia gitu. Jadi from Robert suggestion, so it's okay we pick the student, but the best context is if the student is really do a role as a student. Like for example, when we examine online system for study for e-learning, something like that. Hal yang kedua tadi yang juga cukup menarik disampaikan sebelum kita break adalah bahwa di dalam riset sistem informasi itu lebih ke subjektivism atau interpretivism rather than positivism. Meskipun 90% dari paper-paper di jurnal SI itu banyak yang alirannya objectivism. Tetapi ingat, interesting, from Robert said that even when we interview someone, actually the researcher also influence the participant, ya. Jadi kita nggak bisa betul-betul independen. Jadi subjek riset itu tidak bisa betul-betul independen dari researcher. Kalau betul-betul independen, kita betul-betul melihat dari luar benar-benar. Bahkan ya tadi ya, menanyakan saja, bertanya saja, itu akan mempengaruhi bagaimana perilaku dari subjek riset kita. Sehingga tadi silahkan thinking ya. Jadi sebenarnya AS research, it is, can we do positivism for the AS research, or actually so far AS research is more interpretivism or subjectivism. And also the third point that also interesting is it is very important to explain the context of our research, yeah, in the beginning of our paper, in the beginning of our research report, yeah, to help to assist the reviewer or to assist the reader to understand the context of our research in IS research, to justify our research method, yeah. And then finally, when someone want to transfer our finding to their context, our explanation about the context will be very useful, ya. So ini tiga poin menarik, silahkan dipikirkan, so you can think first, and then we will continue after 5-minute breaks, ya. So we will have a break, Robert, for 5 minutes. Okay. So ya silahkan teman-teman ngambil snack dulu di ruangan masing-masing, ya. Thank you. So we will back in 5 minutes.
Okay, sure.
Ya,
Bye.
Ya, makasih.
Kopi dulu, Pak.
Where your dealing's not for free. Say it's clear, but I can't see. Girl, you're giving what I need. Where you take it all. She's got miles and miles from me. Put it on like it used to be. Oh, just practice what you preach. I can't fake when you take hold of me. Take hold of me. I can't fake when you take hold of me. You take hold of me. You take hold of me. Left the take hold of me. I can't fake when you, I can't fake when you.
Thank you, videonya bisa di off-in lagi. Baik, teman-teman. So, Bapak Ibu, guys, so thank you. So again, we'll back to our workshop, Research Philosophy in Information System. Jadi tadi ada beberapa hal yang menarik ya, teman-teman. Kita sudah sampaikan ya. Jadi kita sudah ngomongin tentang dua mazhab atau cara mikir yang cukup bertentangan, ya. Pertama adalah positivism atau objectivism versus the interpretivism atau subjectivism. So it's a two major ontology atau two major of the research philosophy, ya, yang banyak di dunia, yakni apakah teman-teman melihat segala sesuatu itu, fenomena teori itu satu untuk semua, so one for all, ya. That is a positivism of objectivism. And then the research subject must be independent dari researcher. Jadi untuk bisa mengungkap kebenaran itu, maka research subject itu harus betul-betul independen dari researcher. Jadi kita nggak boleh bersentuhan dengan research subject kita. Harus dibikin mereka behave normally, ya, naturally, gitu, sehingga tidak ada kontak apapun, gitu. Dan the finding can be generalized. That's the first major philosophy. And the other research philosophy is the interpretivism or subjectivism. Percaya bahwa nggak mungkin kita tuh nggak mempengaruhi, ya, dan kebenaran itu sangat tergantung dari researchernya, konteksnya, sehingga satu finding nggak mungkin one for all. It is impossible one for all konteks. Jadi pertanyaan generalisasi nggak relevan lagi. Is a better the question should be not generalizing, but whether it can be transferred for other subject research or not, ya. Sehingga dalam hal ini menjadi sangat penting menjelaskan konteks dari penelitian yang dilakukan. Nah, menariknya adalah ketika kita sudah masuk ke penelitian sistem informasi, di mana sistem informasi adalah interaksi antara teknologi dengan people, interaksi teknologi dengan social system like organization, so it become an interesting question. Which one is the most appropriate for research in information system? Dan let's we see, nanti akan ada diskusi lagi bagaimana generalisasi dari Robert, ya. So I just highlight some interesting statement from you, Robert, so you can continue your presentation, please.
Thank you. I will go and share the slide. This one. Okay, so let me move on a little bit now to the nature and purpose of research itself. And I'm going to suggest that the purpose of research is simply to discover knowledge. It's that moving from what you believe to what you know. And to do that, we have to ask and answer questions. It's really important to have research questions that we ask, and we also try to answer them. I say this also because many authors don't bother. They just say, well, I thought it would be interesting to go and do something, so I'm going to do something, without actually trying to create a problem or a question as part of the motivation. So we need to think about the questions that we ask, and the format of those questions will influence the way we do the research. And I suspect that both of them will depend on our philosophy and our epistemological assumptions, and then, of course, our personal values. So here's a couple of questions. Why are Indonesian IS students better at programming than similar students in Singapore? I'm sure you like this question. And what are the drivers of programming success among Indonesian and or Singaporean IS students? The two questions are aiming at the same subject, but the two questions are phrased in quite different ways. And I think the answer to the two questions may be somewhat related, but it won't be exactly the same answer. I think both questions are reasonable. I think it's reasonable to ask questions like this. Why is something the way it is, or what is making something happen? But How do you feel about the questions? Which question do you like and why? Which question do you not like and why? And maybe there are other questions which we need to ask. So I'm going to send this one back to you, the audience. Do you have any feelings about these questions? I don't mind what your feelings are, but I think this is actually an easier question to answer. How do you feel about the nature of those questions? Anyone like to offer? Yeah.
Yes, silakan yang mau berpendapat. So, in my opinion, the first question is there is assumption. There is an assumption first from the first question, because the researcher assume, or maybe he has a proof, or he has a strong proof that the IS student, Indonesian IS student, better at programming. In this first question, he believe, or he has proof that the Indonesian student is better than in Singapore. So, and then he trying to investigate why. So for the first question, I think it cannot jump to the question why before he can convince the reader that he assumption, or he claim that the Indonesian student is better than Singapore is correct. And the second question, I think, is more open question, because he asked about the drivers, the factor influence a student between the difference between Indonesian and Singapore. The finding can be the same, the finding can be different, but there is no assumption. The second question is more open rather than the first question. That's what I'm thinking about the two questions.
Okay. Anybody else like to offer a different opinion? Because actually what you said is not what I expected.
Okay. That's in chatting.
Yeah,
some student.
Sure. The first question is requiring explanation, while the second is more limited. It may produce construct. And then the next one, Indonesian IS student better in programming because in our society think if we are a computer student, we should make something related to computers, like make an application beside a bachelor degree in Indonesian software engineering is rare. Okay, so in a sense, this is an explanation. This is an answer to the question, but it's not a preference for why. It's not a feeling about the question. So I was asking, what is your feeling about the question? I was not asking you to answer the question. But Amna is correct in saying that the first one is the requiring an explanation. Why is it like this? So when I wrote the first question, I made the assumption that it's true. So maybe I need to rephrase this slightly. Hold on. Let me stop sharing briefly. And let me go and retype this question. And then let me go to here and this one. Okay, so now, Tony, I changed the first question. Let's assume it's true. Let's assume we have facts, we have data to demonstrate that it's true. And I just put the why at the end. That's really what I meant to say. So thank you for correcting me. I have to make my question more clear. I wonder if anybody has any thoughts about the question now. Adam says the first question seems more impolite. First question is to produce mechanism and structure. I actually prefer Amna's original. First question is to produce an explanation. But Adam, why do you say it's impolite?
Adam, boleh ngomong Adam?
Is it impolite to ask why questions?
I don't know, sir, but it's like membandingkan.
Yeah, it's okay in Indonesia, that's fine. Silakan.
Membandingkan generalisasi Indonesian student and Singapore student.
Okay.
I don't know, sir.
That's okay. I think sometimes questions can be impolite. They can certainly be direct. But
Adam said that the first question is like trying to comparing between Indonesian student and Singapore student. For some people, they believe it is impolite. The question is impolite when we trying to compare the ability between one people and the other people.
Is that only for Indonesia and Singapore, or is it for any pair of countries?
Any pair,
maybe Indonesia and Singapore is too sensitive.
Any country, sir.
Any country.
I feel, yeah.
So if I compare Argentina with Norway, that's also sensitive.
Yes.
But a lot of IS research does that kind of comparison. A lot of people are comparing 2 or 3 or 4 places in some kind of respect. So I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm just going to say your interpretation that it's impolite tells me something about you.
Robert.
Yes.
This research question, and also Adam answer remind me with my research about a few years ago about there are the biggest religion organization in Indonesia. It is Muhammadiyah. It's called Muhammadiyah, and the second is NU, Nahdlatul Ulama. Those are 2 biggest organization in Indonesia. Actually, when the IT is getting popular in Indonesia, there are assumption that the Muhammadiyah people are more educated people than Nahdlatul Ulama people. And in that time, I'm very interested to investigate the phenomena. I'm trying to. I have a research question similar like you. I'm asking which one is more IT literate, which is the Muhammadiyah people or Nahdlatul or NU people. And I think that will be also sensitive
Yes.
question, but
yes,
interesting question actually. I mean, the phenomena is very, very good to give feedback to both of the organization. In that time, I used the Rogers innovation of diffusion model. About the model of the innovator, early adapter, something like that. I was trying to mapping a group of people between the two. So the comment from Adam is interesting. It's happened in Indonesia, especially when we talk about the group of very popular groups in Indonesia.
I've had similar experience myself. I've asked questions and the reviewers say, you're not allowed to ask this question. It's too direct, it's too impolite, it's too rude. You have to ask the question in a different way. So the second question is a much more gentle question. The second question is not so direct. But I think that you'll get different answers. The 2 questions will lead to somewhat different answers. So my only purpose here is saying, when we do research, we can ask questions. We need to ask questions, but how we ask the question is important. Because the kind of question you create will lead you to collect some kind of data in order to answer that question. And maybe it's going to be difficult to answer the question, or maybe you can get in trouble for asking that question, because it's just too sensitive for some people. And therefore, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong or good or bad. It's just a matter of sensitivity. We need to be sensitive to the questions we ask. I wrote on the next slide, I put some more questions. How can Indonesian IS students improve their programming skills? I think that's probably more gentle. It's not, I don't think that one's impolite. But maybe you do. Maybe you think it's impolite because it makes the assumption that they don't have very good programming skills and they need to improve them. You could interpret it that way. That's not my interpretation, but you might think the word improve means right now they're no good. How can teachers help Indonesian IS students improve their programming skills is also another question. And these are both how questions. And how questions are related to process. How do we do something? How can we do something better? How can someone help someone to do something? And we can ask how questions, but the answer to a how question has to be something about a process. People need to do things in a different way or do things better. But to me, the questions are fine. I'm not sure if you would agree. What does Tony the engineer think? Are these reasonable questions or are they not reasonable questions?
So I think it's reasonable. For the first question, I think the focus is on the student. The subject research must be, the respondent must be the student.
Yes.
But the second is the teacher as the focus. So my respondent must be the teachers.
Right.
But actually the second question can also verification from the student as well.
Yes. Yes.
So after I collect the information from the teacher, then I am trying to do some triangulation from the student, whether the opinion from the teacher really work or not from the student. But yes, the priority for the respondent, for me, for the first question is from the student view, and the second is from the teacher view, I think.
But in the second study, maybe it will be useful to have some objective measure of skills. Because you need to measure, it's not just the students think that they're better, but there is some way to measure, are they better? You know, if you go to your typical class and you have, let's say, 100 students, they will not all get A. Some will get A, some will get B, some will get C. It's normal. But if you ask the C students before the exam, do they expect to get a C? I guess not all of them will. Some of them will think they will do quite well, even if they don't. So student opinions about their own skills may not be totally reliable. You need to have some kind of objective measure of those skills as well. And probably teachers' answers about how they can help are also not entirely reliable. Partly because it's not just the teachers helping, it's also the teachers working with the students. And even then, teachers can make mistakes. Teachers don't always get things right. With experience, hopefully they do better. But a person who is teaching the class for the first time, or a person who's teaching the class for the 20th time, may have a different approach. And so some objective measure of teacher quality, teacher skill, teacher knowledge, teacher help may also be helpful. So I think there's room for both positivism and interpretivism in this kind of question. It depends on what kind of data you want to collect. Here's a different question, and this is a question which relates to my own research. How can effective knowledge sharing among employees be enabled and sustained? How do we help employees to share knowledge and also help them to continue to share knowledge? Now, of course, the question is rather short and I didn't give you any context. So the context is very open. But this was my research question in a project a few years ago. And I was looking at a Chinese global logistics company. So, you know, if you think about FedEx or DHL, it's that kind of company, global logistics operating in China. And when we talked to people, we interviewed people, we found many barriers to prevent knowledge sharing. And so we asked, how can we make it better? We know that there are barriers, so what can we do about it? How does that kind of research feel? Is it going to be easy to answer that question? How can we enable and sustain effective knowledge sharing? What kind of data do I need? What kind of method? How do I collect the data? How do I analyze the data? And maybe even how useful is the research? Is the research finding only going to be useful for this one company because it's their problem? Or do you think I can generalize my findings to other companies, maybe other logistics companies or other Chinese companies? Or it's not possible? Because if the research is not useful, it's probably not worth doing. Maybe this is just a consulting project for one company, and they pay me for the consulting, but I don't actually publish the paper. So it's a question about value, about how useful is it. I'm going to ask you to read this paper for next week because it was published. And I'm picking the paper because it's relatively easy to read and follow. It relates to almost engineering problems, certainly big systems problems. But the approach we used was very qualitative. This was action research. This was working with. So the researchers and the employees worked together in order to work out what's the best way of doing knowledge sharing. We made some suggestions, they tried it, they gave us some feedback. We made some more suggestions, they tried it, they gave us some feedback. And so backwards and forwards, we were able to reach a good solution. So we could answer the question, but we could also measure how good was the practice by working with them. Now, certainly here, the researcher is having an influence on the employees, on the research phenomenon. Definitely. I'm not an observer only. I'm getting involved. And that means it's highly subjective. But I can also use theory to help me to drive the change. And the theory is more objective. So slide 21, this is a project I worked on with my PhD students in 2016 and 2017. It took 18 months. 18 months is quite a long time. And it took a long time because it took a long time to interview lots of people, talk to lots of people. We visited 4 different working locations. Downtown offices, offices at the airport, offices in headquarters. We talked to different people at different levels, from low-level clerical staff all the way up to executive vice president. So we're talking to people across multiple levels. And we made suggestions about how they could do things better. They tried them, it did work. They gave us some feedback. We made the suggestions a second time, a little bit more detailed, so as to find a better way to work. And so we can answer the question, but we can also generate useful knowledge for the employees. So my question, how can effective knowledge sharing be enabled? It's also, how can I help the employees to share knowledge better? And I do it by working with them. And this paper was published in Information and Management 2 years ago. Tony, I'm not sure where information and management counts, but it's probably Q1. Now, moving on a little, I've got some more research questions for you. And really what I'm doing is asking you to think about which method, which epistemology, which research values, and probably for each question, there could be multiple answers. There's not only one answer for each question. So the first question, how do employees behave when they have to use an IS that doesn't meet their needs? This is actually a very common situation. It probably applies to you, because I guess that you have university systems that don't really help very much. And you would like to find a better way of doing things. And if you're a student and you have to use university administration systems, I'm sure that there are things you don't like. But if we take it to the employee level, employees in a company, they have to use a particular email system or a particular ERP system or a particular customer relationship management system. And it doesn't really help them. It doesn't help them to get their jobs done. How do they behave? How would you want to answer that question? I see Tony has forwarded the YouTube questions. I can answer those now, or I can do them later. What do you prefer?
Later, that's fine. Later.
Okay, all right. Any thoughts about these questions? The first, I mean, all three questions here are basically the same question, but just written in different ways. What behavior do they do when they're required to use is more or less the same as how do they behave. And then the third question, why do they create workarounds in this context? And so workarounds perhaps is part of the answer to the first two questions. Because workaround suggests finding another way to get work done. So they're required to use an IS, it doesn't help them, so they find some other way to get work done. Now, do they create workarounds as individuals? Do they create workarounds in teams? Do they coordinate their workarounds? Do they share their workarounds? Do they hide them so their managers can't see them? Do they openly practice them and they don't care who sees them? Do they document their workarounds? Do they write them up so that new employees will be able to use them in future, like a training manual? I've seen all of those things. And when we talk about this situation, it's quite common that employees find a new way to work, but they don't tell anyone. They keep it secret because they're scared of getting in trouble. But in other organizations where everybody is doing this, then you have a culture of workarounds, a culture of everyone is sharing, everyone's creating good solutions. And they do it very openly. In fact, in one organization I studied, not only were they open, but they actually had a training manual. They had standard operating procedures for non-standard work behavior. So the company gave them standard operating procedures how to work. The employees create their own standard operating procedures for the work they want to do. So highly independent. And also definitely breaking the rules, not working in the way they're expected to work. So to answer these kind of questions, it's probably interviews, it's probably observation. It may also be a survey because there may be too many people to talk to. The company where I studied this had 300 employees. I cannot talk to 300 people, it's going to take too long. I talked to 10%, and we can survey the other ones. and see if they generally agree or they want to say something different. I see somebody raise their hand. Okay, Ari says, in my opinion, the method used is in-depth interviews so we can find out what things are not in accordance with these employees. Amna says, can a research question be independent from the research philosophy? The research philosophy is normally quite private. The research question is normally something quite public. So when you write your research article, you don't normally say, what is your research philosophy? You do normally say, what is your research question? So I guess they might be independent. You personally believe that everything should be objective and everything should be realistic and everything should be single truth, but then you ask a question which is different. That's okay. I mean, it's your problem, not my problem. If you can live with that, that's fine. But if your question is contradicting your philosophy in the paper, the reviewers might have a question about that. But as I say, normally research philosophy is not something we write about publicly. We tend to, it's internal values. It's not things we make in public. I go on to the next one. Okay, so questions 4 to 6. How do we help employees who need to use an IS that doesn't help them? How does employee behavior change over time in this situation? And what are the impacts on other stakeholders? Supply chain partners, service providers, professional associations, customers, if employees have to use an IS that does not meet their needs. So I can generate lots of questions just out of one simple situation. The situation of employees don't have the right IS. But I can find lots of questions. And each of those questions can be a paper. Each of those questions can be a whole investigation. Especially number 5. How does employee behavior change over time? But to do that, we need to collect data over time. We need longitudinal data. And most IS researchers don't do longitudinal studies because it just takes too much time. They don't want to spend so much time. They want to do cross-sectional data. They collect data once and then they answer their questions and finish and publish. Longitudinal data takes much, much more time to collect. Maybe you have to collect data every month for 6 months and you see if there are any changes in the way they are practicing their work. And asking questions about other stakeholders is very complicated because then you have to go and collect data from those people. And it may be very hard to collect data because their details are confidential because of data privacy. The company won't tell you who they are. So unless you can identify them yourself, it may be impossible to collect that kind of data. So some questions are easier to collect the data. Some questions are much harder to collect the data. I'll just stop here briefly and see if anybody wants to comment. After this, I have another 5 slides or so, and then we'll finish. We're going to be finishing in about 25 minutes.
Okay. So,
Any questions?
Silakan yang mau bertanya boleh nulis di chatting ya. You can just write your question in the chatting, or you can also, for you who are in YouTube, you can put in the live chatting on YouTube for any question. Then I will forward to Robert in the Zoom.
Yeah, we'll go back to answer those questions in a moment.
Yep. So I think this is very interesting. So I agree with you. The center of a paper or every research actually is the research question. Yeah. So how we really pick the most or the best research question, and because the research question will, like like some example that you present here, it will influence or lead the method that we need to do. Like when you give a question, when we pick a question like, how does employee behavior change over time? When we use change over time, it means the time period when we collect the data should be cannot be just cross-sectional. We have to use over time data, time by time, and then. But also the research question is not because we have to be aware about the research method that we can do later, but also depend on our knowledge gap that we find, or our problem, or the problem that we want to solve. Because my belief is, when someone conduct a research, there are two goals or two aims. First is to fulfill the knowledge, because when he read the literature, he found some knowledge that uncover. And the second is for fulfill or to address a problem, a real problem. And I read in some literature said the good research is a research that between them has a dimension to fulfill the knowledge and also address a practical problem. Not just fulfill the knowledge without the benefit for practical things, but also not the practical thing without has a novelty in a knowledge. So there is the question that we pick, whether 1, 2, or 3. I think again depend on the knowledge gap that we find in our literature. If, for example, in here, if in our literature said that the subject is influence of the employee behavior to the RS adoption, for example. So I will pick the second question. If there is a research gap between the relationship between the employee behavior and the IS adoption. But if the knowledge gap is about there is no finding about how management can help the employee, so need some intervention from the management to the employee. So I will pick the number 1 question. So that's my comment. I mean, when we want to pick which one is the right research question, it will depend on the knowledge gap we find in the literature, and also the practical implication that, or the problem that we want to solve from our research. That's my idea. Is that true? What do you think?
Yes, but you used 2 interesting words. You talked about research gaps and you talked about knowledge gaps. Are they the same?
In my opinion, yes. This is the same. It's the same. Oh, wait a second. Research gap.
It's a trick question.
I prefer to use a knowledge gap because the research can be research report. When I for example, if someone has we call it like a project report, for example. Project report can be our literature for our research as well. And some research report, some of them are project report, like they just say some case study without any novelty in knowledge. So I prefer actually we work between the project report and the knowledge gap. Right. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay. I prefer knowledge gaps because a knowledge gap is something we don't know. And it's something that we need to know. It's something that's based on a problem, and it's useful to answer the question, or useful to address the problem. Amna had the comment, I think an interesting problem is a problem that is dilemmatic, meaning it's some kind of dilemma. There's some kind of situation where it's not clear if the answer is positive or negative. We need to try and find out. I quite like that. But to me, a research gap or a literature gap is simply no one has done this before. And to me, just because no one's done it doesn't make it interesting. It doesn't mean it's useful. It doesn't mean we care about it. But it's very, very common in IS and also other subjects that people say, we found a gap in the literature and we are going to fill the gap. And I always say, who cares? Who cares if you fill the gap? Why does it matter to fill the gap? Why is it useful to fill the gap? I mean, if you're a dentist, you worry about gaps in teeth. And if you're a librarian, you worry about gaps on the bookshelf and you push the books together to delete the gaps. But as researchers, I think that research gaps are not really very useful or interesting. I think research problems need to be based on knowledge gaps. And that knowing this would be useful. Knowing this would help us in some way to achieve something we cannot achieve today. So this is something I'm going to come back to next week as well. So we'll return to the idea of gaps and what they're for. I think maybe I'll go on for now and finish the slides, and then we'll come back to the YouTube questions a little later. So, the next slide is exactly talking about this. I'd forgotten. So this is more or less repeating what I just said. I prefer problems that need answers. And there are people in real situations who need answers to those questions, and maybe the researcher can help. I do need to think about what kind of data I need to answer those questions. I do need to think about where will the data come from. Because if I can't get the data, then I can't do the research. And sometimes PhD students in particular are very good at asking questions, but they're not quite so good at thinking where the data comes from, or not so good at thinking how they will be able to collect that data. Where are the sources? I said I'd talk about inductive, deductive, and I'll do this briefly. Normally, we use these words in the connection with theory. And so deductive theory is theorizing from the general, from the literature, in order to study something very specific. And a lot of IS research tends to be deductive. Research models are created out of literature. Hypotheses are created out of literature. And then they are tested in a particular situation to see if they work or not. Inductive is the opposite. It's going from the specific to the general. So the specific is one case or one company or one problem in one situation. And we collect data about that particular situation. And we build theory out of our observations. And that theory can then be tested by other people in other contexts, or it can be tested by us in other contexts. So the theory itself is not valid automatically. It needs to be tested multiple times in order to reach validity. So deductive and inductive are two words that we use quite frequently. Positivism tends to be more associated with deductive. Interpretivism tends to be more associated with inductive, but not exclusively. There's also abductive. And abductive is theorizing in the simplest way possible. And so it's the suggestion that the most simple explanation is probably correct. And therefore, abductive thinking or abductive reasoning is an argument that we shouldn't try to make things too complicated. we shouldn't look for very complicated explanations. We should look for simple explanations, because simple is more likely to be correct. However, simple is not guaranteed to be correct. There's always a dimension of error. There's always a chance that it's wrong. So it's a philosophical position, really, that simple is more likely to be true than complicated. And it's a very old principle. Occam's razor is another way of explaining this thing. Occam was a monk in England in the 13th century, so 700 years ago. And this was his basic principle as well, of trying to make sense of the world. The most simple explanation is usually the right explanation. In terms of data, we can talk about qualitative and quantitative. I don't want to go into too much here. I'm certainly not going to talk about analysis. But you need to think what kind of data you want to collect to answer the question. And so for me, it's not appropriate to talk about qualitative or quantitative methods. It is appropriate to talk about qualitative or quantitative data. A case study may involve qualitative or quantitative data. A survey may also have qualitative or quantitative data. Because in your survey, although you may ask questions, do you agree or disagree with these statements? You can also ask, what would you do, or why, or how questions, and you can invite people to write their answers. And that will be qualitative data. So surveys don't have to be purely numbers. They can also be words. And case studies and action research can also have numbers if you want to collect data from large numbers of people. And I find this to be a very common misperception. In fact, I teach a class called Qualitative Research Methods. And I'm sorry to say the name of the class is wrong. There is no such thing as qualitative research methods. It doesn't exist. But everyone makes this mistake all the time, including me. If I'm talking about case studies and I'm talking about action research and I'm talking about ethnography, that's fine. But even case study can be positivist or interpretivist or critical. It's very, very dangerous to make everything just qualitative or quantitative. But how you collect the data depends on your skills in collecting data. How you analyze the data depends on your skills in analyzing the data. If you don't have the skills, you can't do it. So if it's survey data and you're going to use statistics, of course you have to have the skills. If it's interview data and you're going to do thematic analysis or grounded theory or data coding, you have to have the skills. If you don't have it, you can't do it. So it's important to expect to collect data which you can analyze. And that means it's important to collect data to answer a particular kind of research question. If you ask how or why, usually you need to collect at least some qualitative data. And if you can't analyze it because you don't know how, then maybe you shouldn't ask that question. If you want to collect quantitative data, you'll have to ask the appropriate research questions that fit quantitative data. And some of the what questions and some of the comparison questions will be exactly like that. We've talked about generalization, and we've talked about how to generalize. Do you generalize from one context to another context, one situation to another situation? You can, but you can also generalize a theory. And theory I like because it's a way of taking your findings and creating a new theory out of them. A theory that makes sense in the context of your findings. A theory that explains something. And a theory which can be tested by other people. So your theory is validated by you, but that's n equals 1. It's 1 validation. The theory is going to be stronger if it's validated by other people. And some IS theories have been validated 10,000 times or more. They're very, very well validated. We don't need any more of these. We do need new theories to be validated more. So, Tony, you mentioned diffusion of innovations. Generally speaking, people won't challenge that. It is very well accepted. But it means it's very hard to make new contributions. Because what else can we say? We've said it already. Making a new contribution with DOI is really hard. Same for TAM, same for UTAUT, same for IS success model. These theories have been tested thousands of times. They're good, they work, but they're not very interesting because we don't learn anything new from studying them.
But they cannot be, they can be challenged actually.
They can.
I mean, like, yeah, because they just, see, for example, for the group of the people saying like, especially when the Roger said that 15% people of the population are innovator, like 5%, 15%, 30% of early adopter, something like that. That's quite interesting because it will be different in many regions. And some, they said, for example, there must be a group of people with this characteristic. It can be different characteristic.
Yes.
It can be a new characteristic, sometimes a new characteristic. So I think it's many IS theories are interesting to be challenged for a specific context.
Okay, but not many researchers do that. Most researchers tend to test theories to confirm them, not to disconfirm them. People don't like disconfirmation. They like positive, not negative. So the citation here from Peter Seddon and Rens Schiepers, what is generalization? You're arguing there's a reasonable expectation that something you believe to be true in one place is also true somewhere else. And so we can generalize context to context, or context to theory, or context to an existing theory which you modify. So there's value in all of these approaches. My last slide is just a conclusion. I suggest that everybody has a research philosophy, even if you don't know about it, even if you're not aware of it. The philosophy provides you with a framework for asking questions because it provides you with values. It provides you with a way of thinking about the world, about relationships between things. If your philosophy is very narrow, then you're going to have a narrow view of the world and you won't be able to ask very many questions. If you have a very open mind about philosophy, you'll be able to ask many more questions. Now, again, that's not right or wrong, it's just who you are. It's just how simple or how sophisticated or complicated you think about the world. But the philosophy is always a personal thing. It has to be a personal thing. It's your personal belief about how things are organized. And so I think it's helpful to be aware of your own beliefs, not just unconsciously, but also consciously. And so my first question today was, what's your research philosophy? And 2 or 3 people answered, and most of you didn't. So I'm hoping that most people would try to write down, what are the basic elements of your research philosophy? How could we describe it? I think you will find this a useful exercise to try to write it down and think about it, and also challenge yourself. Challenge yourself based on what we talked about today. Challenge yourself based on what you see in the world. Is your philosophy consistent with the world? Does it make sense? Or are there some limits? Probably there are limits, We all have limits to what we believe in. Nothing is 100%. Tony, maybe I should go back to the YouTube questions before we run out of time.
Yes, please. Yes.
How do research limitations on scope of IS regarding human technology interactions compared to the scope of human behavior? And I presume psychology. It's a very complicated question. All research has limitations, that's for sure. No research design is going to be perfect. Every research design will be missing something. Missing because the theory didn't allow us to ask the question, or missing because my imagination didn't allow me to put it into the interview design. But no research is going to ask every question which we could ask. So I'm not sure if this is almost a philosophical question. A researcher who is more open to new experiences, who is more open-minded, who is more imaginative, will experience fewer research limitations. A researcher who is less open-minded is going to experience more research limitations. I think that's how I'm going to answer the question, but I'm not sure if that's the answer you want. Different cultures will produce different research results. How to make the same assumptions between one object and another in generalizing results of research. Well, maybe you don't have to generalize. If the results are so different, maybe you try to explain why the results are different, and you explain why generalization is not appropriate. I think we tend to overgeneralize. We look for universal solutions. Maybe journals and editors and reviewers also look for universal solutions. But if we talk about culture, and then we also talk about universal in the same sentence, it seems to be a contradiction. Because culture is not universal. Culture is very local. The only way around this problem is to look for the universal things in culture. There are some, but there aren't very many. And so if you really want to look at culture and the way different people in different cultures think and behave, then creating a universal theory or a universal finding is difficult. If you know the work of Geert Hofstede, and he identified 4 dimensions of culture, and he suggested that everybody in the world in different societies will vary on these 4 dimensions. So he talked about power distance, he talked about individualism, he talked about masculinity or femininity, he talked about uncertainty avoidance. And later, another researcher talks about long time versus short time, long term, short term. We have long-term thinking or short-term thinking. So we could look at those dimensions of culture, and we could use them to measure the values of people in different places. And maybe they could help us to explain why things are different. For example, information systems, to me, are things to help increase certainty. They help organizations to be more certain, to control. ERP systems in particular are control systems. They help organizations to control the whole organization, help the CEO to be in charge. And that's fine if you live in a culture where you want to have control, where you want to have certainty. But if you live in a culture where you don't worry about control and you don't worry about certainty, implementing an ERP is probably a very bad idea because it will change your culture in a way you don't want to change. So when I do research in organizations, if I'm doing action research and I'm trying to help the employees or help the management to solve a problem, I have to be very careful that my solution does not change the culture of the organization, because they probably don't want that, unless they ask me to do that specifically. But technology can change culture. It can change the way we do things. Social media is a good example. Social media is very, very widely used, but it's changed the way people communicate, and it's changed the vertical structure of organizations. With social media, you can talk to your boss just like that. If you don't have social media, and you don't even have email, and you don't have a telephone, then it's much more difficult to talk to your boss, because there's a secretary. And the secretary is a kind of a filter. And the secretary will receive all the letters and decide which letters go into the rubbish bin and which go to the boss. And so social media, email, telephones, to some extent, they have removed the role of the secretary. That may improve communications. I don't think the secretary will be happy, because she may lose her job, or he may lose his job. But the boss may also not be happy, because now there's no filter. And the boss gets far too much email and far too many social media communications and doesn't have time to deal with it. So social media can change things to make things better from an employee point of view, but maybe make it worse from a management point of view. Because everything becomes too fast, everything becomes too easy. And there is a dark side to that. There is a negative side to too much user-friendliness, to too much speed. When I talk to my students, and I say, if you want to contact me, you can use email, you can use social media. And then I say, how quickly do you expect me to reply? And of course, they say immediately, 24 hours a day, which is not really fair. It's not really realistic, but that's their expectation. In the old days, when we're using email only, they would say within 24 hours. So for email culture, 24 hours is okay. For social media culture, 24 hours is absolutely not okay. It's much too slow. They need immediate response. What can I do? Can I fight the technology? So a study of social media technology and its impact on organizational processes could be very interesting, but you would need to look at different people's points of view. The employees, the managers, the IT side, because IT will worry about security. There are many valid perspectives. And those may vary across cultures. So in Indonesia, you may like to use Facebook. In China, they like to use WeChat. In South Africa, they like to use WhatsApp. In Thailand, they use Line. Different people, different cultures will use different applications in different ways. What is common about bad research designs is whether the number of respondents is sufficient. How to ensure an adequate number of respondents, even though different experts have different opinions. Wow. I guess you pick your expert and you follow them. If you like Creswell, you follow Creswell's advice and you cite Creswell. If you like Morse, you cite Morse. If you like somebody else, you cite somebody else. Actually, I don't agree. I don't think that the number of respondents is the worst situation for research design. I think a bad theory is a good example of a bad research design. Having enough respondents or not is an operational problem. Having the right theory or the right model or the right method, to me, that's a strategic problem. And you have to get the strategy right first. Now, if the reviewers say not enough data, you have to collect some more, well, maybe you have to collect some more, but at least they didn't tell you to change the method. Changing the method is much more painful. Collecting more data is relatively less painful. And how to ensure an adequate number? Collect too many. Too many is safe. You can always delete them. Not enough is not safe because you can't fake them. You can't create data when you don't have it. So that's my simple answer. If in doubt, collect more. At least for quantitative. For qualitative research, we will talk about data saturation. We say you have enough data when talking to more people will not tell you anything new. And you can work that out quite easily. You talk to 30 people and the person 31, 32, 33, they all say the same things you know already. No value in talking to anybody else. You can start. Okay. And finally, Rahman asks, what should we make first, research objective or research question? I'm going to say neither. I'm going to say research problem. The problem comes first. Then you can think about the objectives, then you can think about the question. But I think the problem is the first thing. Tony, are we done?
Yep. Okay. So, yep. Thanks, Robert. So I would like to highlight some important point that we have learned today. So I hope that students, especially students of the postgraduate program, IS postgraduate program, ITS, hope that you write down all the important lesson that we got today. So at least we have six things that we have to remember. Ya, jadi ada 6 hal yang menarik teman-teman. Saya ingin sampaikan sebelum nanti diakhiri. Ya, pertama adalah bahwa di antara kita selama ini mungkin sudah terbiasa melakukan tesis, ya teman-teman yang mau melakukan tesis atau dosen-dosen yang selama ini melakukan penelitian itu lebih cenderung memilih deductive approach. Deductive approach itu gini, teman-teman dosen yang selama ini mungkin atau teman-teman mahasiswa yang selama ini bertanya, kamu pakai teorinya mana, gitu ya. Jadi memilih teori tertentu, percaya teori itu benar, ya. So you pick one theory, then you try to test the theory itu in a specific object. The other group of the researcher atau student adalah mencoba dulu mengumpulkan data, ya, mengumpulkan data. You collect, you see the pattern, and then collect the data, then you come up with a new theory. Nah, itulah sebenarnya inductive, teman-teman. Ada 2 pendekatan. There are two approach, ya. Deductive, from you believe that theory will be general for all the situation. So you are positivism in that time, and then you choose the specific subject research. You try to confirm the theory, or you are interpretivism or subjectivism person who try to collect data from specific object, then trying to understand the pattern, then finally you come up with theory. So you are interpretivism. Jadi selalu ada 2 arah pendekatan, apakah dari atas ataukah dari bawah. Itu sadar tidak sadar dipengaruhi oleh riset filosofi kita, bahwa kita percaya semuanya pasti bersifat general, sebuah temuan pasti bisa digeneralisasi, and it applied in many contexts. The other side, researcher in IS also believe that actually we cannot generalize everything, ya. It depend on the context, ya. So di sini kita belajar bahwa ketika teknologi itu berinteraksi dengan manusia atau sistem sosial, yang bisa kita lakukan bukan mengeneralisasi, not one for all, but what is the context, whether the context is relevant with our context or not, with the other context or not. Nah, ketika relevan, ada kemungkinan besar itu bisa implementasikan. Dan itu yang menjadi kuncinya, teman-teman, dari semua itu adalah pemilihan research question. So the most important for our thesis, for our research, for our paper is research question. So when you choose formulate the research question, ketika teman-teman memilih research question, selalu diingat ya, pick the research question that filling the knowledge gap but also useful, ya, but also useful. So pilih research question ya yang mengisi kekosongan dari penelitian sebelumnya, tetapi memang ada manfaatnya. Manfaatnya bukan untuk tesis teman-teman saja ya, bukan. Tapi manfaatnya betul-betul untuk praktikal. Kira-kira dia akan solving problem apa. Nah itu, dan itu juga harus dipilih research question itu, nanti subjeknya siapa, datanya dari mana, dan method yang paling tepat seperti apa. And finally, teman-teman, the most important about research philosophy is to be open mind researcher. Ya, jadi teman-teman terpenting bahwa apapun research philosophy teman-teman ya, we believe everyone has their own research philosophy, whether you are positivism or you are subjectivism. Actually, it influenced by your experience, influenced by your education background. But the most important is to be open mind researcher. Jadi Anda membuka diri, kita membuka diri untuk look, it is very dangerous. Ada quotation menarik dari Prof. Robert Davidson. There is a interesting quotation from Prof. Davidson. It's dangerous that you just quantitative researcher or you are just qualitative researcher. So in my personal belief, the quantitative should be completed by qualitative data as well. So and finally, it's not whether this is correct or not. Ya, ini bukan tentang riset kamu itu benar atau salah. Ya, tapi ketika kita melakukan sesuatu with the research philosophy is about you. Actually, your research philosophy will represent who you are, not about whether your research is correct or not. And the most important again is the method. Yeah, the method, the research method is the most important in our research. It is not about whether you use the quantitative or qualitative, but whether your research method is really answer the research question or not. So next week, teman-teman, next week we will discuss more detail about research method for information system. Ya, minggu depan kita akan bicara tentang metode riset di sistem informasi. Akan banyak membuka wawasan karena ternyata bukan cuman desain science research aja, tapi ada action research, ada survey, ada etnografi, ya, ada banyak research method that we will discuss next week, and let's see which one is your favorite or what research method that can be applied in our research in IS. And really, it's really important, Robert, because most of the IS researcher and also lecturer in Indonesia came from computing or informatics engineering background. So most of them believe that they must use design science research because I often has invitation to be a speaker in a School of Information System in Indonesia. Many of the School of Information System in Indonesia, they ask their student and the lecturer to do research just by creating or making or developing application. So, and a question just come up almost every month is the research method in IS must be creating application, or it can be created other things and other any research method for information system. And we will talk about that next week. Yeah.
We'll talk about next week. Sure, we'll do.
Yeah.
We'll do.
Yep.
Okay.
So please, audience, give big applause for Prof. Davison. Would you please to turn on the speaker?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you
for your valuable time, and we will see you next Saturday. Ya.
Yep,
Thank
we'll
you.
Sure. Okay.
Ya.
Thank you.
Take care. See you next week.
Okay. Bye.
Terima kasih teman-teman. Bye.
Terima
Thank
kasih
you.
Pak Tony. Terima kasih.
Makasih.
Thank you Mr. Davison.
Thank you.
Seiring dengan berkembangnya teknologi informasi, diperlukan pengetahuan mengenai bagaimana cara mengelola teknologi informasi yang sesuai dengan kebutuhan dan proses bisnis dari suatu perusahaan. Sebagai salah satu institusi terbaik di Indonesia, ITS memberikan sumbangsih dengan mendirikan sebuah departemen yang bernama Sistem Informasi yang sejalan dengan kebutuhan tersebut. Departemen Sistem Informasi didirikan pada tanggal 14 Juni 2001 atas dukungan dari Presiden keempat Republik Indonesia, Bapak Abdurrahman Wahid. Pada pidato beliau di saat Disnatalis ITS yang ke-40 yang menyarankan ITS untuk membuat sebuah fakultas yang selaras dengan perkembangan teknologi informasi. Mahasiswa sistem informasi dibina agar pada saat lulus mereka mempunyai kemampuan sebagai individu yang mampu berkontribusi di bidang sistem informasi. Profil lulusan Departemen Sistem Informasi adalah perekayasa data dan informasi, analis sistem, manajer proyek IT, manajer informasi bisnis, analis bisnis, dan perintis bisnis IT. Saat ini, Departemen Sistem Informasi telah mendapatkan akreditasi A untuk program studi sarjana dan B untuk program studi pasca sarjana dari Badan Akreditasi Nasional Perguruan Tinggi atau BAN-PT. Selain itu, Departemen Sistem Informasi juga mendapatkan akreditasi internasional, yaitu Asian University Network Quality Assurance Standard. Sejak berdiri, Departemen Sistem Informasi sudah jauh berkembang dengan total mahasiswa mencapai 771 mahasiswa, memiliki 2 program studi sarjana dan pasca sarjana, memiliki 35 dosen dan 21 tenaga kependidikan. Itu Departemen Sistem Informasi juga membuka kelas sarjana internasional atau International Undergraduate Program yang dalam proses belajarnya menggunakan bahasa Inggris sebagai bahasa pengantar. Departemen Sistem Informasi memiliki 5 laboratorium penelitian yang terdiri dari Infrastruktur dan Keamanan Teknologi Informasi, IKTI, Akuisisi Data dan Diseminasi Informasi, ADDI, Manajemen Sistem Informasi, MSI, Rekayasa Data dan Inteligensi Bisnis, RDIB, dan Sistem Enterprise, SE. Sebagai sarana pendukung, Departemen Sistem Informasi menyediakan fasilitas yang bisa digunakan untuk mahasiswa, meliputi ruang kelas yang nyaman, ruang sidang, ruang baca, ruang kesehatan, laboratorium pembelajaran, ruang diskusi pasca sarjana, dan fasilitas umum lainnya seperti musola, parkir, dan toilet. Kualitas mahasiswa sistem informasi dapat dibuktikan dengan perolehan berbagai prestasi, seperti juara pertama dalam kompetisi Future Ready ASEAN di Bangkok, Thailand pada tanggal 27-28 November 2019, Best Project Manager pada kompetisi Project Manager Competition pada tanggal 27 September 2019, Pada kompetisi gimnastik tahun 2019, sistem informasi menyumbangkan 2 juara, yaitu juara pertama kategori Cyber Security dan juara kedua kategori Data Mining.
Hingga yang terbaru, mahasiswa sistem informasi menjadi pemenang dalam kompetisi COVID-19 INA Ideaton 2020 yang diselenggarakan oleh Kemenristek Indonesia.
Sebagai departemen yang ingin lulusannya dapat bersaing di dunia global, Departemen Sistem Informasi memberikan kesempatan kepada mahasiswanya untuk mengikuti program pertukaran pelajar atau Student Exchange Program ke berbagai institusi pendidikan di berbagai negara, seperti Cardiff Metropolitan University, United Kingdom. Selain itu, ada juga short program yang bekerja sama dengan Kumamoto University Japan, Inha University South Korea, Shibaura Institute of Technology Japan, dan program Joint Degree atau Double Degree khusus untuk mahasiswa pasca sarjana yang bekerja sama dengan National Cheng Kung University Taiwan, National Tsinghua University Taiwan. Di samping itu, Departemen Sistem Informasi juga sering mengadakan kuliah tamu yang menghadirkan narasumber yang expert di bidangnya masing-masing agar mahasiswa dapat memperoleh ilmu langsung dari para pakarnya. Departemen Sistem Informasi memiliki banyak sekali kegiatan tahunan seperti Information System International Conference atau ISICO dan Information System Expo atau ISE.